All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Herp House Rock. Tonight we got Greg Graziani Reptiles in the house. This guy has been an elusive fish to catch. Stay tuned.
Okay, Greg, honestly, and Ben's about to jump in, but, we always kind of start the episode kind of asking about the beginning, but, the really interesting thing that I find about your beginning is there wasn't really that much of a reptile hobby when you got into it, right? Or you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, I've just had my 51st birthday. So I started capturing snakes at 7 years old in 1976. Wow. So I grew up in Florida. I was born and raised in Florida. Funny, I'm the only Python hunter that was born and raised in Florida. Yeah. out of the two co-hosts there. But I started catching snakes at 7 years old. I spent a lot of time down at the Miami Serpentarium, and Bill Haas was my idol. I just, watched everything he did. I actually have a photograph of my mother when she was 9 years old, holding an indigo at the Miami Serpentarium.
Nice.
Wow. That goes to 1956, I think. That photograph there. So since 76, that's when I started herping. I grew up literally in the Everglades. West Broward County was not built up when my parents moved out there. That we moved from Miami, and way before there were any pythons, basilisk lizards, tegus, monitors, none of that existed at that time, and they were still shipping snakes through the U.S. mail. So it was a different world. We pretty much caught everything. Nothing was captive bred back then. If you had a python, it was wild caught from the country of origin. And at the time, ball pythons were kind of garbage snakes. Nobody could get them to eat because they were all, adult captives that did not do well in captivity. So, I've seen a lot of changes in the industry itself, and the way things are done. And what's really kind of funny for me is around Python. There's a couple of times in my career where people that had maybe been in the industry for 5 to 6 years had no idea who I was and what I did throughout my career. Once I got big into the ball pythons, anybody that came into the ball python industry that didn't know me pre-ball pythons had no idea what my history was, to the point where Andrew Wyatt, who used to be the president of USARC initially, when Python Hunters came up and I was working with the commission, at the time he was working with large pythons, and he's like, who is this ball python guy? Why is he dealing with the pythons in the Everglades? He doesn't know anything about big snakes. And Andrew didn't know who I was. I started out breeding every species, every color and pattern morph up until the granite berms of the Burmese python that there was. Wow. We did African rocks, retics. I was one of the few people that actually have bred African rock pythons and argue the fact that they're very similar to captive retics and berms. They always have this idea that African rocks are nasty, and that's because back then everybody that got an African rock got a wild caught snake. Go down and catch a berm in the Everglades, I guarantee he's not going to be real sweet. Neither is a retic over in Indonesia or Thailand or anything like that. You're going to have some issues with those animals as well. And so Andrew had no idea what my background was. A lot of people don't know I bought the original founding tiger reticulated python from Carl Herman. I own the original animal. Carl had already produced, it was shortly after the Baldagos had produced the super tigers that I purchased that original animal. And from Strictly Reptiles, I purchased the very first calico reticulated python that was imported into the country back in the early 90s. And again, people that know me for the ball pythons had no idea that my first passion was the big giant constrictors, and I worked with them for years, but I also saw the writing on the wall once the larger breeders started pumping out Burmese pythons in mass numbers because of the size of these animals. that the ball pythons were kind of the direction we went in, with those animals.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
That's
with
awesome.
the first calico that came in the country, now with the calico trait with retics, that's something that you can't really pick out right away. That's something that develops over a few years, so you don't really know what you have until they're a couple years old, right?
Well, the crazy thing about the calico retic, it's the most money I've ever personally paid for a snake. I bought that snake for $6,500, and that was just crazy money back then. And the snake never produced for us. The original tiger reticulated python, the calico, and my 21-foot, I had a python that I raised from a hatchling that was 21 feet, 257 pounds when I shipped it out. All were sold to a guy named Lou Dodano. I don't know, do any of you know who Lou is?
Mm-hmm.
So Lou owned Serpent Safari up in Chicago area. And Lou was a tiny little guy, I mean, 5'6" or so, little guy that was just into giant reptiles. And he had an 18-foot reticulated python that was import that he had on exhibit. He had multiple facilities. One of them was in a mall. But the 18-foot reticulated python had grabbed Lou and wrapped him up, and he was clinically dead for 6 minutes.
Wow.
Wow.
The 21-foot python he was purchasing from me, along with that other group of pythons, was replacing the animal that they had to cut off of him. It grabbed him in a feeding response in a walk-in enclosure and wrapped Lou up. Lou was also the owner of Baby, which was touted as the world's largest Burmese python. If you guys have ever seen pictures of that animal, it was extremely obese. I forget what the weight was, but it was a ridiculous amount. I think that python was about 20 to 23 feet on that. But he bought out my collection of retics. I got out of the retics before the morphs really hit. We started focusing on the Burm. So at the time, retic morph-wise, all we'd ever produced were tiger retics and super tigers. I haven't even kept up. There's so many retic morphs. I do remember the first captive golden child that Kevin McCurley produced, because he walked up to me and Mark Mandick at the Daytona Expo and was like, look at this. And what was funny was Mark was a big ball python guy, but never worked with retics. So looking at the first golden child, just like a lot of law enforcement in FWC and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, if it doesn't have pattern on it, they can't identify it. But it was pattern. I mean, I knew immediately that it was a retic. I didn't know what the genetics behind it were by dealing with so many of them. But that was one of the hardest problems I had with U.S. Fish and Wildlife with the whole ball python. I stayed in touch with somebody out of Washington, D.C., giving them updates on ball pythons, because if it didn't look like a normal ball python, I was having shipments held because they couldn't identify the snakes that were in them.
Wow.
It was really crazy. I mean, when you get a $25,000 snake shipped into you from Canada, you don't want it held anywhere. Luckily, I talked them into holding it at my facility until they said, well, you can't release this until we can clear what it is. And I said, well, it's going to be a future breeder, so I'm not worried about it. But they couldn't even identify the animals. So I would make posters as new mutations came up. This was way before Morph Market or World of Ball Pythons or any of that. I think I stopped doing that around 2000, kind of keeping a list of who produced what, because it got crazy at that point.
Oh, yeah.
So that was even before the boom of ball pythons happened, right?
Before the big boom. I mean, we still had, I'm trying to think, back in 2000, we may have had 10 or 12 base mutations to work with. Spider ball pythons were still stupid money. 2005 was when I left the sheriff's office because I sold 2 bumblebees for $50,000.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
What's a bumblebee worth now? $150?
$50 all day long.
Yeah.
I was making $36,000 a year at the sheriff's office, and I sold 2 snakes for $50,000, and that's when my business, which I've had for a long time, literally from 2005 to present, was full time.
Wow.
That's awesome.
The brief hiatus we'll probably talk about a little bit, as I took a curator position at an alligator theme park for the last 2.5 years. So what a lot of people don't know, that this is the first public thing that I've done since I've come back. The last ball pythons I produced was in 2017.
Really?
I actually stopped. Those were kind of accidental clutches. 2017, I took a position as a curator at a zoo. And I maintained my collection, but we did no breeding in 2018 or 2019. Didn't produce a single animal. Just the alligators was all we were producing at that point. So this is our first year back after almost a 3-year. We only did 5 clutches in 2017, so I don't even count that. So 2016 was my last kind of big ball python breeding year. But we're happy today. We just put the 85th clutch in the incubator.
Wow. What a comeback, huh?
Yeah, we went from 0 to so yeah, really excited. I've got a new partner here. We've actually Graziani Reptiles, I guess, will always still be part of this, but the business is merging to become Florida Gator Gardens.
Yeah.
We're going to be open to the public. I have my current girlfriend is incredibly supportive of this whole thing, and we are going to be specializing in exotic plants, especially edibles as well. And that's what she does. She handles all the horticulture around here. And it's funny because we started this idea in October. And the whole edible plant thing I thought was really great. We're on 14 acres here. And then this COVID hit, and it's amazing how self-sustainable we can be by raising, some meat birds, some rabbits, the local wild game, and then all of the edible plants that she's brought in. It's amazing. And our exhibits are all going to be kind of biodomes that people are going to enter into, which is going to be really cool.
That sounds awesome.
So,
man.
Yeah.
And I'm
waiting for Ben to drop the
biodome reference.
That's his favorite movie.
One of my favorite movies. Oh man. You were talking a little bit about, selling your first bumblebees for $25,000. What did you sell your first? And I know that you kind of talk about this a lot, or you have in the past, that you guys are known for, your pastel jungles, your cinnamon pastel is what you would call it, and your pewters. So what were the first, you sold 4 of them to Dan Sutherland, is that right? Is that what I remember?
Yeah. So wow,
what did you sell them for, if I can ask?
What's that?
What did you sell them for?
Okay, so this is the crazy thing about this story. The first 4 I sold for $2,500 a piece. Okay, which is still kind of crazy money at that point, because all we had proven out at that point were albino ball pythons.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only morph that was proven. There were people that had caramel albinos in their collection, but nobody had produced them yet. The year we produced the first 7 pastels, and remind me if I don't get back to it, remind me to talk to you guys about our first clutch of the year this year, because it's really kind of exciting for us. But it should be hatching on July 7th or 8th. But
awesome.
That's back to this whole story. We had picked up an imported pastel animal, a pastel jungle. And that was got him in 92, I think. And we didn't push things back then. We weren't breeding at 18 months, that type of stuff. So the first clutch was produced in 1997. We bred that male to a single normal ball python. We got 7 eggs. All 7 babies were pastel.
Yeah.
So the only type of dominant gene that we had really dealt with was tiger retics at that point. And I don't even think by 97 they'd produced the super tigers. So we didn't understand incomplete dominance or co-dominance or any of that in the industry. It wasn't even discussed. And we honestly didn't know what we had. So we got 100% that looked like the dad. And I got the dad as a hatchling. So I knew what he looked like as, for the time he came in as an import, until he grew up and produced for me. So right out of the egg, people that haven't hatched pastels for the first time are like, wow, these things are really light. They take a good week to start to get that color. And then within the first 6 months, they really color up. So we put those animals out there, and we were calling them at the time, jungle ball pythons were sought after, which was a bright yellow and black snake that was never reproducible. Mm-hmm. We were calling these type 2 jungles when they hatched out. We hatched out the first 7. About a month and a half to 2 months later, Kevin McCurley hatched out a 50-50 clutch of pastels, and he was calling them pastel jungles at the time. So when I saw the photographs, and I think we're still dealing with dial-up at this point, so to see a photograph of his animal, I got to wait for it to come up in bars.
Yeah.
Everybody's like, he's got the same thing you've got, you guys need to get together. And, Kevin and I are both trying to buy each other's, breeding stock from each other so we could isolate it. And I said, listen, I produced these animals, 2 months prior to him producing his, but I said, it's stupid to market them as 2 different things. It's obviously the same thing.
Right.
So I'll concede and go with, because pastel jungle sounds better than type 2 jungle, which is what I was calling them. So the name actually came from Kevin with those animals. Now, I took them to Daytona that year at $2,500 a piece, and I didn't get a single bite on them. Nobody knew what they were. Nobody had any clue what the potential of these animals would be at $2,500. So we went home with them, and we got geared up for the next breeding year. And I had met Dan and Colette, I think, at that Daytona. And Dan called me up, and I talked a lot. And Colette was always the genetics person that I talked to, but Dan was always doing the deals. Dan called me up, and we talked, the 3 of us talked, and they said, what do you want for these animals? I said, well, I've got 2 more gravid. I've got the same female gravid again and another female. Back then, all we had were normals. So I'm breeding this male to normal females. Got another one gravid. So depending on genetically what happens is going to depend on what happens on the price. And they said, well, we'll take the 4 you've got available. Because I had 7 animals hatch out, and I kept 3. And I had 4 that were available for sale. They said, we'll take those 4. $2,500 a piece. So they bought those 4 animals. And then a couple months later, the next clutches hatched out. And they said, what do you want for those? And I said, well, that we now know what the genetics is. Kevin's hatching, I'm hatching. The price went up to $7,500 a piece on the pastels at that point. And at the peak, males went up to 10,000 within the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
The male pastels. Once we produced as a matter of fact, what happened was in 2000, I think I produced the first super pastel. Kevin had produced 2 females the year before. We produced the first male super pastel. And that really put us up there to just produce a lot of pastels,
Yeah.
at that point. Males went up to 10,000 a piece was the peak of, the pastels. And being one of the first and being the first incomplete dominant mutation that was out there, I still think to this date, I don't think there's another mutation that has affected the industry like the pastel has. I don't think there's more crosses with any other mutation than that. And a lot of it's time and the fact that it's dominant. But I think, being part of that mutation, the albino ball python got everybody into ball pythons. But the pastel is what really sparked people because they could buy something immediately and see a return without having to produce hets or double hets or the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
So getting back to that first clutch I was telling you guys about.
Yeah.
I still have in the collection, Zoe and I, we still have the original male pastel that started my whole bloodline. The original normal female, her name is Togo. She has produced almost 200 babies. She is 26 years old.
That's great.
And we have their daughter from that very first clutch of 7. We still have her, and she's the one that produced the very first super pastel by being bred back to her dad. For the first time in, God, I don't even know how long, we have duplicated all those breedings. So our very first clutch of eggs this year is 8 eggs from the original male pastel to the original wild female that started the whole blood. So,
let's go 8 for 8.
They're not going to be worth any more than any other pastel. But if somebody wants to literally nostalgically go back to the original bloodline, these will be siblings to those original animals.
How much are you going to sell me one?
What's that?
How much are you going to sell me one?
You know, throw me out a number. We'll put you first on the list if you want one of those animals. And again, I'll be surprised if we hit the odds and get all pastels out of that. So it's probably going to be 50-50.
We're going 8 for 8.
Yeah. Before Ben makes you an offer, I just want to warn you. Before you came on, the name underneath him was Jewy. So just be very careful on this offer.
Hey, you know, I took flack for years and years and years from Ralph Davis. And I don't know if he still has this on his website, but he had a quote that I loved. He said, you need to talk to Greg Graziani on how to build a ball python collection on a budget, because that man hasn't paid for anything. He's traded for everything he has. Once the pastels and cinnamons came out, I did. And Ralph always wanted to sell me something. And as a matter of fact, I had a deal to trade. I didn't have any pies. I was going to trade a super pastel male for a pied male and a het pied female. And I had this deal all lined up with Ralph Davis. And Ralph and Pete Call were really close. Pete helped Ralph get into the business, the whole 9 yards. Ralph said, listen, Greg, I know we made a deal, but Pete is busting my balls. He wants that deal. And I'm going to step aside and let you do the trade with Pete. And I'll sell some stuff. I'll pick up the super pastel someplace else, whatever. You know, no problem. So the crazy thing is, I make the trade with Pete. And I catch flack from a number of other herpers going, you got ripped off. That super pastel is so much more expensive. The pie that I got from Pete was the original leopard producer that started my whole leopard.
Oh, wow.
So this is actually one thing I wanted to bring up, which I thought was kind of funny. So, you know, I personally kind of got into the whole, like, finding out about breeding around 2002. And, you know, back then I had like a photo bucket account and I was obsessing over everything online, saving pictures. And I remember a picture on your website, and it might have been mid-2000s, where it was the first time you made, I think, spider het pies. And the animal in the egg was a leopard pie, but you had made a comment about how the pattern, the way the pattern was manipulated, just because it was het pied. And that picture, honestly, to this day, has always stuck out to me.
I still have that spider.
Nice.
That spider, that actual animal is what created the name leopard, because when those spiders came out, there were 2 of them that hatched out. When those spiders came out, they were gold. They had the real thin spider, but it was, you know, the leopard rounded it all off. And then they had these black spots going down. And the first thing I thought when I saw that animal was jaguar.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, well, wait a second, they're African, so it's got to be leopard.
Yeah.
That's how the name came about for the leopards. And Pete was producing leopards before that. We thought they were all het pieds. We were under the assumption that some pieds created this marker because the leopard pattern was very pied patternish when you looked at it.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, we still have never tracked down the initial leopard bloodline somewhere in Pete's collection, because obviously when Pete bought up the pieds he did, like us, he was breeding to a bunch of normal ball pythons to produce his initial hets. So somewhere in that group of imported normals, I'm assuming is where the leopard gene came from. And we've never tracked it back to the original animal. And by the time I had been producing them and figured things out, and again, we weren't running out and telling everybody how things were happening at that point. I think by the time I started talking to Pete about it, it was too far removed for him to go back and track his collection to wherever that originally came from, you know. But there's no doubt in my mind it came out of Pete's group. I don't know.
Oh, sure.
whether it was pied linked initially or he bred something into it.
So two things with, the original pieds too, and you may know about this. So he had an axanthic pied pop up in his collection. We're not talking that many years ago, but he traced that all the way back to, I think, maybe one of the original pieds he got in the country. I'm not sure if you remember that backstory with him at all.
With who? With Pete?
Oh, with Pete. He had an axanthic pied pop out. Just he didn't realize he was breeding for it. He had an axanthic pied pop out, and this might have been like somewhere between 2012, 2015, I want to say, but he had tracked it all the way back till the original import. So somewhere along the line in the beginning, he had double-head axanthic pieds, but didn't realize it until he had happened across the right animals together in his selection.
Right. That also happened to Mark Mandick. That's where the Marcus Jane axanthics, same deal. He tracked it back to some other collection wherever he bought his hats. Or his pieds as well. So I mean, I didn't realize, I hadn't talked to Pete or heard that from Pete on that, but I know it happened to Mark as well.
Yeah, and I think do you remember what year Jay had his first Myrtle Beach show? Roughly. So I remember I was there with Adam Chesler that year. Or it was maybe a couple years before that too. We were talking about, but he was obsessing over the leopard trait. He spent a lot of time at Pete's place. He was picking them out. But I know, again, I was at a show in North Carolina with Adam, and he walks away and he comes back over and he's all like, he's got this deli cup. He's looking around. He's like, look what I got. And he had an axanthic leopard in the cup. He's like, I had no idea what he had. I just picked it up. But yeah, I remember Chesler really, truly obsessed about that gene. And there was a couple of years there where I feel like that gene got a little quiet, and then as soon as the clown came out, it absolutely exploded again.
Yes, yeah, it did, and it's one of the staples for us. We are doing quite a bit with the leopard stuff, especially with the clown, and we've actually slimmed the collection down genetically to 5 simple recessives. So all of the dominant and codominant genes, we're trying to get into those 5 simple recessives so that eventually, that's what we'll still have all the different color and pattern morphs, but within the recessives that we're working with. And so we narrowed it down to the albino, and I put the albino and candy together. We work with those together. We work with the snake keeper line axanthic. We've got the clown bloodline, the ghost, and then the pieds. And so everything is going through those. We're not there yet where that's what everything is, but that's the direction that we're heading towards.
It's a smart direction. I mean, it's practical for nowadays. In the beginning, everybody wanted things fast, like you said with the pastel, and something that you could breed to your normals and get something was amazing. Now everyone's really starting to play the long game in the industry. If it's not something recessive, people aren't really batting an eye at it like they used to. Multi-gene codoms just aren't really doing it for people. But how this industry goes. Everything comes in phases. Everybody obsessed over this year, and 5 years from now, we're going to be doing it completely different.
Yeah, it's I'm amazed after taking kind of a 3-year hiatus at how well the industry, especially the ball python industry itself, is still doing. We've been doing really well with the albino alligators, and I'll always have a place for the ball pythons. I started out with the large constrictors was my initial specialty, but once I got into the crocodilians, now we're dealing with a level of intelligence that's trainable, and what we're doing with the alligators is really amazing stuff. And I didn't know when I left to go work as a curator with alligators and crocodiles if I'd come back to the ball pythons. But like I said, with Zoe here working with me now, this is her first year. I told her most people don't get to hatch, 80, 90 clutches their first year. So we're really having a good time, and she's pushed me this year to get everything back up and breeding again, and we're really excited to do that. And it's really fun. I love to teach, so to have somebody that just wants to soak all this up like a sponge, it's really a good place to be.
That's awesome.
So I have this tendency to hijack these every once in a while, and Ryan has a lot of trouble getting words in, and Ben does. I get a feeling we're slowly going to get off this ball python topic and start moving on. Do you guys want to throw in anything before we move on to the next thing? I don't want to.
I just want to say how impressed I am that you have some of your original animals still after 20-some years. That's very rare in the industry.
Yeah,
it is. Togo, she is the oldest ball python in our collection. I want to see how long she will continue to breed. The oldest breeding ball python I'm aware of was in Eugene Bassett's collection, and that animal produced at 37. Eugene will definitely correct me if I have this wrong, but I think it died at 38.
Wow.
So he had that animal. Now, he also had that animal through the 70s when nobody was really breeding. So there was a large period of time where that animal was not producing. So it wasn't producing that whole time. Togo's been with us for 26 years. We got her before her first shed. She was one of the imports that I handpicked out of Strictly Reptiles before her first shed. So she was less than 10 days old when we got her. So again, I don't know her exact date of birth. It was in May. But so I think she just, I'm trying to think, she turned 26, 27 this May. She is definitely our oldest and largest ball python. She's still, I've yet to actually put my hands on a 6-foot ball python. She's, 5 and change, and really huge. Normally gives us about 11 or 12 eggs, but this year it was 8. But she had been on exhibit for the last 3 years, and one of my most handled snakes. Wow. When people are getting photographs and things like that, she's been handled a lot. So she dropped down from that 11, 12 egg to 8 this year.
Really cool.
I know Vin Russo was talking about how he has ball pythons that are, I think, just about 30. He was saying that still produce. It's so impressive to me. When we first got into it, Ryan and I first got into it, which was in 2012, I guess it was. And once you start getting into it, everybody always is like, hey, I found a snake in my house, or hey, my friend has a ball python, and they always want to tell you about it, right? So a friend of mine was like, oh, I have this ball python, and I went to his house and he showed me a big snake. I'm like, wow, that's cool. He goes, yeah, I had it since I was a teenager. It's 27 years old, and it was just a pet, and it looked awesome. And I was like, that's the oldest ball python I've ever seen. And then now I'm starting to hear more and more of like snakes that are, in their 30s producing still, which is just crazy to me. I mean, just didn't think it would happen.
Yeah, I think it. Oh, go ahead. I was going to say the difference in the old school and the new school generation. The new school generation, we're always looking for a new color, and we can't have 100 of these. We have to keep it at a certain number. We're always replacing it with something new. We're always upgrading, trying to keep it updated. And the old school guys, there's a passion there. There's something there, and there's a certain love for that certain animal you've had, and why not hold on to it? And there's not many people in the industry that would have taken the original pastel and bred it to the original normal that he put it with. But this is a hobby. You're supposed to have some fun with it every once in a while.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. There's also been, like I said, a lot of changes. When I first got into ball pythons, nobody was breeding them, so we didn't know that you could push a male to breed in 6 months. You could push a female to breed in 18 months. We were looking at these animals and kind of going by their natural life cycle, figuring these guys aren't going to produce till they're 5, 6, 7 years old. So I didn't even attempt to breed ball pythons that young. And again, I don't know, that's not something they do naturally in the wild. So over the course of the animal's life, how healthy is it to start breeding a ball python, especially a female at 18 months or 2 years old, versus when naturally they probably wouldn't reproduce until they were 7 to 10 years old. I don't know where the longevity goes in that. I'm very curious to see. To my knowledge, the oldest living snake on record is a ball python that lived for 47 and a half years at the Philadelphia Zoo. Now that animal was a subadult when they got it, and they're only counting the time of its lifespan from the time it was at the zoo, which was 47 and a half years. So you're probably talking about close to a 50-year lifespan on one of these animals. And I'm really curious to see she's, if that's what we're looking at, this female's only halfway there, to see what happens with that. But I think that's something that I've tried to get as close to nature with my animals and away from that laboratory mentality over the years. And it's the total opposite from what I was when I was younger. The idea that we have these extremely clean or sterile areas that are perfectly ventilated and the perfect temperatures for these animals is really arrogant and ridiculous once you sit down and think about it. And I learned this in the beginning of the Burmese python problem in the Everglades back in 2008, 2009. I was really combating the argument of the explosion of these animals in the wild, that they could just multiply exponentially. And, you know, my argument was, at the time, I think the largest clutch of Burmese python eggs at that time was like 109 from one female. And it was in captivity. It was a captive breeding of a very large snake. And my argument was, under optimal conditions, is the most food, the lighting, the temperature, everything, this snake produced 109 eggs. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to Kevin Inge, who is a biologist for Florida Fish and Wildlife. And he said, so you think that was the most optimal condition for that animal to be able to produce that? You guys have set that up. And I said, well, yeah. And he said, so you've done a lot of field herping. How many wild gravid snakes have you had that have laid slugs? Off the top of my head, I couldn't think of any. And he said, well, how many do you get in your captive breeding? I said, in comparison to the wild snakes I collect that are gravid, quite a bit. I mean, the number is exponentially higher in captivity. And he said, so what makes you think that your laboratory is the most optimal place? He said, these pythons out here in the Everglades, if it's too hot, they can move. They can go underground. They can get in the water. They can get up in a tree. They can bask. They have all of these options. Humidity, all of this stuff. You've got an 8-foot casket, and you think that those are optimal conditions? He said, be careful, because if there's ever a record clutch laid, it's going to be out here in the wild, not in captivity. So if 109 was in, and 3 weeks later, now the snake that laid 109 eggs was 18 plus feet long. They cut open down in Miami an African rock python that was 15 feet. It's a big snake, but it's not ridiculously huge.
Right.
There were 86 viable eggs in that animal at 15 feet long. My biggest clutch of eggs from a Burmese python was 78, and that was from an 18 plus foot female. So there was 86 in this 14 foot, and I don't know if any of you guys have been down or actually captured wild pythons, but the first wild python I captured, my thought process was, oh my God, this thing is thin. This thing's emaciated in my mind. No, that's what a wild python looks like. We're used to these big fat things laying in these enclosures, getting rabbits tossed at them. And no, they're not thin. So this 15-foot python is not this massive girth animal that had 86 eggs in it. And that's when I started realizing the arrogance that we had of keeping these animals sterile and clean and fed and lighted and all of these different things. And they're in these shoe boxes or rack systems, or even on these big, enclosures that are 8 feet long. That's nowhere near what these animals can do in the wild. And it got me to think a little bit more along trying to create what is natural for these guys. One of the things that's really hard for anybody to do, I did it for years. I don't condemn anybody, I just don't do it anymore, is cutting eggs. I don't cut eggs anymore. They're not designed to be cut. They're designed to be picked. And I think the closest thing, and I was one of those guys, it's like, look, this could be the next $50,000 animal, and he could knock his egg tooth off and not get out, and I got to cut the egg. And typically, if an animal doesn't hatch out on its own, genetically, there's a reason for that. There's an issue with that animal. It's weak for a reason. Not everything hatches out in the wild. And yeah, we can save them all. But if it does have a congenital defect and it's too weak to get out of the egg, and you raise it up for 3 months and sell it to somebody and it lives for 2 years and dies, you're still kind of putting poor genetics back out. And for me, it's just a personal thing. People cut them all the time. I am not here to preach or jump on my high horse and say don't cut. And I've cut eggs pretty early. I mean, ball python people have been cutting eggs, you know, in the 45-day mark forward and watching them, you know, sit in there and still hatch out. And it is amazing how much stress these animals can take. But nowadays, they pip out. And if the clutch pips out and I got one that doesn't, yeah, we'll go ahead and cut it. See what happens. It hatches, it doesn't. I mean, I'm not going to just leave them there. But we think, you know, the animals overall have been healthier. Little things that I don't know whether they affect things at all, but you guys have hatched out, you know, snakes right out of eggs. They're slippery as can be. First thing we used to do, just so we could get a handle on them to go ahead and pop them and see what sex they were, is wash them off. Because once you get, you know, all that albumin off the snake, you can handle it. It doesn't just slip through your hand like an eel. That doesn't happen in the wild. They hatch out, and whatever that is on them stays on them. We no longer wash the snakes off anymore. We remove them, and this is something that I love learning from people that kind of came to me in the beginning. Mark Mandick started with one of those original Pastels. His whole Marcus Janes started off of one of those original 7 that he purchased from me years later. And Mark came up with this idea. He started taking the eggs off of the substrate he was incubating them on about a week before they hatch, and was putting them on the substrate he planned on keeping them on. So whether it was cypress or aspen or sandy chips or whatever it was. And, you know, ball pythons have been known to be finicky eaters or difficult to get eating. And when starting with the babies, something that didn't cross my mind, but once he explained it to me, if you can explain something to me that scientifically sounds plausible, then I'm willing to look into it. He said, you know, in the wild, the babies hatch right out onto the substrate they eat on. He said in the industry, what we've been doing is allowing these babies to hatch out on vermiculite or perlite, typically. It gets all over them because of the albumin. It sticks to them. We rinse them all off. We clean them off, and then we transfer them into something else. And that seemed to Mark, and when he said it to me, I agreed, maybe a little sensory overload, little guys. They come out, and there's all these new smells and tastes and all this stuff, and they're being changed from one environment to another, and then in 10 days expected to eat. So what we do now is we go ahead, and about a week before the eggs hatch, we pull them off the perlite. We use the same container. We clean the container out, and we put in whatever bedding we're going to use. Currently, we're using aspen. We use cypress mulch and a number of other things, coconut, bark, whatever. We put the eggs on those, and we allow them to hatch out on those, on that substrate. And then we leave the entire clutch together. Once the entire clutch hatches out, anything that's really sloppy or slimy, we'll clean out, add a little bit of fresh substrate, but it's the same substrate as what they're on. We add a water bowl in that tray, and we allow the clutch to stay together till they shed. And then when they shed, that day, we will go ahead and put them in their individual enclosures and offer them their first meal. And since we started doing that, our feeding response has skyrocketed on problem animals. Most of our animals have ate, you know, pretty well from the beginning anyways. And, you know, some of the thoughts Mark had was typically they're all going to hatch down into a burrow, you know, a termite mound or whatever they're in. And if there's a bunch of babies all together right before they're offered their first meal, that may stimulate a feeding response because I got to get it before my sibling gets it. And the idea of the lack of sensory overload with these animals, and by not washing them off, you know, the albumin dries on them like it would in the wild, and it simulates. Now, again, they're in a shoebox, so they don't have a whole cavern or the rest of the world to take off in. But we try to simulate as much of what we think they would be dealing with in the wild, especially to get them started and going. And it's worked really well. And I don't know, you know, I'm very free with trade secrets or anything. If I can help somebody better what they're doing with their animals, I like to give what credit's due. Like I said, I'd love to say I came up with this whole idea, but it was Mark after having a fresh pair of eyes. Sometimes those of us that have been in the industry this long, one of the worst sayings I hate is when somebody says, well, why do you do it that way? Well, that's because we've always done it that way. That drives me nuts. I'm always looking for a better way to do something. And for us with that, I think that's worked. So we typically don't cut the eggs. We try and let everything happen as naturally as it can. And things have worked out really well for us that way.
That's cool. So 2 things on that. So we switched over. We started using the coconut chips as our substrate for incubating eggs, and I started that about a year ago just because somebody said they did it. I was like, I took like 4 clutches and I did it, and they all hatched out perfectly. And I probably should have experimented a little bit more, but I said fuck it and put like the next 100 clutches on it. But they all turned out really great. Everything pipped, everything came out, everything was great. Any issues that came along the way, it was probably from typical stuff that would have happened anyways, maybe a little bacteria build up in an egg, but didn't overstress it. But one of your comments too about your feeding response, Junior at JMG Reptiles for a while there was leaving all the babies in the hatch box, letting them all shed in the hatch box, of course, and then he would offer meals while they're in the hatch box. At one point, I know he doesn't do as much as he used to, but like you said, that competitive feeding response, because you give one that meal, and next thing you know, all the other ones would go nuts and be fighting over meals.
Right.
So I thought that was really good. And honestly, I think everything you just said made a lot of sense. And like you said, there's always ways to improve things. We just choose not to fix something if we don't think it's broken.
Right. We stopped a long time ago. One of the things that I did with all of my tubs when we cleaned them was we cleaned with some type of detergent, whether it was bleach or Dawn soap or something. We cleaned everything with that. Now we don't clean with anything but water. And one of the reasons for that, I'm big on immunities and things being built up that way. I think sometimes we sterilize things too much, and these babies are born into the sterile environment so that when you do have a problem, it becomes a much bigger issue down the road. So basically, as far as our ball pythons, they're all in CB70 trays. If I can't see anything on the tray, it's clean, whether it's uric acid or feces or blood or whatever else. We use water. We use a scrub brush. The only time we use any type of detergent is when our females lay eggs. Those tubs we use just Dawn soap, and we do the whole tub in Dawn, especially right where she's laid the eggs. We clean that out really well to get rid of any odor, simply because I have had females go back and just coil up on that spot and not feed and kind of incubate nothing for a period of time. And just by cleaning all of that odor out, most of the time that day, if not the next day, they'll go ahead and go right back on feed once we do that. But that's primarily the only time that we use any type of detergent or anything to clean any of our enclosures themselves. Now, we do reuse some of the plastic deli cups, and we will soak those in a bleach solution and then wash them out and let them dry before they go back on the shelf on those. And that's basically just to cut any of the lime or the hard water spots, that get on those things as well. But I'm not a big advocate of using all kinds of cleaning products and sterilization of the area. These animals pretty much live where every other animal drops its feces, and they do real well. So that's just something else that here we changed years ago. And I got to say, I'm lucky I live in Florida. I hear people up north with collections up north. They talk with respiratory infections and things like that. Knock on wood, in over 35 years, I've never had a ball python with a respiratory infection. But again, we have very high humidity. Stick on the heater, dry out the air, and all of that stuff. Our breeding room itself right now has 6 300-gallon pools of water in it, because there's alligators and water monitors and large reticulated pythons that have big pools in that room. So the humidity in there is ridiculously high. So we don't have any problems. So again, we haven't had any issues with ball pythons, and one of the downsides is they are one of the hardiest snakes out there. They can take a lot of neglect, which is why they do so well in the pet trade as well. But that's unfortunately for them. I've seen a lot of scenarios where ball pythons have lived a very long time in very poor conditions. And again, we want, we advocate for pet owners. We want people to have these animals. We want them to have as much information as possible. And we really, within the last 10 years have started looking more at the enrichment for the animals themselves as well. As stewards to keep these animals, we want to give them, the best life can, in captivity. And that's one of the reasons, all of the enclosures and exhibits we're building now, I talked about biodomes, are going to be very, very large. Our reticulated python anaconda exhibit is going to be 48 feet by 16 feet by 12 feet high. So these animals are going to have a lot of room to move around. Currently, we just finished our sulcata exhibit. We have a pair of African Spur-Thighed tortoises, and they are in a, I don't know what the circumference, I haven't measured the circumference, but it's a circular enclosure that they have, and it's 60 feet across. So it's a big, massive, with two, they have two shallow ponds that they can walk down into, and we're trying to do things quite a bit larger. On the same time, people have to understand that if you take a ball python and put it in a big giant exhibit, it'll go off feed because they like to be in confined spaces. So that's another argument that we have with pet owners. Know the animals that you have. These CB70 trays work really well for ball pythons because they like to be in tight confined spaces. But there are other animals that don't, that need a lot more room to stretch out, and that's one of the things we're trying to do with the animals here, which limits the number of animals we have. We currently have a very large reticulated python and a trio of anacondas, and again, we don't plan on adding much more. There, we would like to get at least a big berm, because we also have a bat eater, a Burmese reticulated hybrid that will go on exhibit as well. So we'd like to have at least a nice big berm female in there on the exhibit to have the three really well known giant snakes.
Wow. So I'm sorry, and then this is the Ben question after this. So with the Corona thing going on, I'm sure it put a delay on everything. At what point do you guys plan on opening this up?
Our plan was June, but Corona did it. It not only put a damper on people getting together and congregating, but monetarily it put a big issue. We had some very large sales in Europe on the albino alligators that have been put on hold because the German, French, and European banks would not allow them to send the money out when Corona hit, even though it was their money. We couldn't even get the wire transfers to secure the animals. And to my knowledge, those buyers are all interested, but we can't export at this point. U.S. Fish and Wildlife is not allowing the exports right now. It looked like they were going to open, and now this second wave has come through. So, we still have our U.S. sales, but crocodilian regulations throughout the U.S. are stricter, especially on the American alligator, because any place that it naturally exists, regulations are pretty tight there as well. The nice thing, and we get this all the time, we don't sell normal alligators as pets. I get this. How much for just a normal alligator? We don't produce any normal alligators, and I'm not an advocate of selling alligators for pets. If you're looking for an albino alligator in the $15,000 to $20,000 range, then at this point you more than likely have the ability to put it in the proper facility, proper training with the proper people. If you're going to invest that kind of money into that type of animal. But they are, the alligators are extremely trained, amazingly. We have 4 nuisance alligators that came to our facility from the nuisance trapper I used to work with back in January. And The largest one, Joker, is 12'2". He's a wild caught alligator, and I've got him eating out of my hand now. The first 4 months, we didn't see Joker. He went down into the pond, and that was that. He kept all of the other alligators out of the pond, but we didn't see him if he was gone. And now we've got all 4 of the alligators responding to their name. They're still dealing with a little bit of dominance. Joker has been removed from the main group. He is isolated because he's just not playing well with others, and as big as he is, don't want to lose the other animals. But the other 3 are doing really well together. So we've got Gotham, Arkham, Bane, and Joker. So you guys can see,
That's awesome.
But Gotham's doing the best of all. They are in our training area for the big alligators is 125 feet by 100 feet by 125 by 100 with a big pond in it. There's big oaks that they come out, and Gotham meets me at the gate, and the gate is a good 25 yards from the water. So once he realizes he's got a feed bucket, he's ready to start training. And it is amazing what those animals can do.
Yeah, that's great. I have a question. Maybe, I mean, you're the guy to have on that I can ask this question to, and we'll probably start going off in slightly different directions as we go. But so people ask me, how did all the Burmese pythons get loose in Florida, right? So, everybody's like, oh, somebody let their one pet go, and that one, produced by itself, forever. And the story that I was told was due to a hurricane, there was a facility that, got overrun with water and things, and a lot of berms got out. But you're the expert. You're the guy. You would know better than anybody would know. How did that start down in Florida?
So I'll give you the story, but for those that want a little more information, a little more fun, we basically covered this entire story in the pilot episodes of Python.
Yep.
We actually went down to these facilities, filmed, talked to the FWC investigators, talked to the biologists that were doing DNA studies and all of this kind of stuff. So there's no doubt in my mind that over years, as a police officer down in the Broward County, tip of Florida area there, I would get called to loose boas and pythons on a regular basis. The local departments would call me because most of the guys didn't want to deal with something. They didn't know what it was. But as far as the reproduction, the feral population in the Everglades, couple of facts that are out there. The Everglades National Park, once they realized they had a problem, they have had a number of issues of people releasing wildlife throughout the state, from domestic stock to wildlife. They don't want people dropping dogs off down in the Everglades, or cats, or whatever else. So python, to them, this is where I don't think people thought this through, and most people didn't care, was the poster child. Unfortunately, we live in a Judeo-Christian society, and had they picked any other animal other than the serpent to represent the devil, we may not be having this problem. Because you go over to Thailand, and in Lumpini Park, the people are laying out with giant water monitors and reticulated pythons, and nobody cares. Here we lose our minds when we see something like that. What we were best able to figure out was the day before Hurricane Andrew, there was an importer down there that had a nursery type setup with a facility that was just metal bars with shade cloth over it. And they had imported in 1,000 baby Burmese pythons, and they were all in deli containers. The day before the hurricane, the local inspector inspected the facility. And the funny thing was, everybody's like, well, how can you have this non-structured area? You got to understand, before Hurricane Andrew not only changed what we do on the zoo side of things and housing and maintaining animals, but it changed the whole building code of Miami. Stuff got leveled down there that they never thought would get knocked down by a hurricane. So the whole building code changed. So it wasn't like, oh, we knew this was going to happen. This was one of those first time things. And too little, too late. The hurricane came in. So you could picture, 1,000 baby Burmese pythons in deli containers, which are perfect frisbees that also protect the snake while it's blowing around out there. They get blown into the Everglades. That's the direction the hurricane, took. And so the hurricane was 1992. Okay. And this is the date is a big issue because up until 1994, Vietnam was closed because of all the Vietnam War, all the problems we had. There were no Burmese pythons coming out of Vietnam up until 94. When Bill Clinton opened up the trade with Vietnam, the pythons were cheaper. The bulk of the pythons from 94 to present were coming out of Vietnam. So when they did DNA studies, they linked the python population in the Everglades to 5 different bloodlines.
Wow.
None of which were Vietnam bloodlines. Put those 5 bloodlines before 1994.
That makes sense.
On top of that, if you threw 1,000 pythons into the Everglades, what are the odds 5 females would make it to adulthood and reproduce?
Pretty good.
Of them out there, not predation, a lot of them that are going to die in the storm, but 5 of them out of 1,000, that's not a whole lot to grow up. And what is going to do better in a new environment? A freshly hatched snake or a 15-foot python that's used to laying in an enclosure having a rabbit handed to him?
Mm-hmm.
Valid
When
point.
we went out in 2009, 2010, and we had the massive freeze that killed American crocodiles and manatees and fish kills and Burmese pythons. What we found out was the bulk of the animals that died were the larger animals, even in our crocodiles. Our American crocodiles, what we lost were the 10, 12, 15-foot crocodiles. The 3, 5 foot, 7 foot animals all did fine. The reason for that, just in the cold alone, is core body temperature. You take a little tiny little lizard and put him in 32-degree temperature and let him go sit out on a rock in the sun, and how long does it take for that little animal's core body temperature to be the same temperature as the rock? Not long. But you take a 150-pound python or a 500-pound crocodile versus a 10-pound crocodile, and the core temperature is what's killing these animals when that gets too cold. So the larger animals are where the kill. We were losing larger pythons, not smaller ones. So the theory of people releasing animals into the Everglades and releasing enough adults that could adapt, then find each other and reproduce, man, that's really, really out there. Not to mention, people that are going to release animals are not going to drive 150 miles to the Everglades. They're going to find the closest wooded area to their backyard and they're going to toss that animal out. But if they're that irresponsible, they're not going to trek down to the middle of the Everglades. So the thought process that the media puts out there is that droves of people that don't know what to do with their pythons are driving into Everglades National Park and releasing them, and that's not happening. They've never caught a single person releasing a python into the Everglades. It's just, it's not something, and nobody's come forward to say that's what's happened. And when you look at, again, the bloodlines, those 5 bloodlines, and I've been out of the loop. Once they started doing these Python challenges down there, myself, Michael, and Sean, we pulled out because we didn't like the idea, the way things were being run on that. We backed off. So since about 2014 or 15, I really haven't paid attention to what data or what studies or what they're doing down there. Because the fact of the matter is, when we were really hardcore looking to eradicate them, the biologists were looking to study them. And you can't do both. You can't study it and eradicate it. have to do one or the other. And they've studied it, in my opinion, too long, that it's there. It's part of the ecosystem now. You're not going to eradicate it. And quite frankly, I don't even know how much control they're actually doing by the animals that they're removing out of the area, because after the travels and looking at invasive species around the world, animals find a niche. If there's not a niche for it to fill, it doesn't survive. So these pythons have found a niche. We are not losing all of the rodents, all of the raccoons, all of the possum, all of the deer, all of the wood storks. That's not happening. Those animals are not declining in the numbers that are perceived that the media is putting out there. The pythons have found a niche. And if they didn't find a niche, they would die off.
Yep.
So they're filling something. We've altered so much of the Everglades that you're not going to get it back. And you can outlaw green iguanas and tegus and monitors, but they're already here. In the state of Florida, we have 47 established lizard species in the state of Florida. Only 17 are native.
Wow.
So, and on the lizard species, the majority of those species came in through the plant trade, because eggs come in potted plants from South America, Asia, and all of that. The larger animals, like your iguanas and your tegus and things like that, came in from the pet trade. But, to me, that's a crazy number. 47 and only 17 are native.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, with your Burmese python theory with the deli cups, you're talking about little frisbees. Me personally, I'm a huge fan of the movie Twister, and if you remember Dorothy in the back of that pickup truck, what you're saying right now, it does make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah. It's, when you tell one person, that's fine, but I had to deal with the Miami Herald put out a extrapolation of Burmese pythons reproduction. And they said the average Burmese python can have 35 eggs. And so they did this little thing, and they said, if this snake has 35 eggs, and each of these have 35, and each of those have 35, they just showed this massive explosion. And the first thing I said was, and very few people get this, what's the biggest problem with 35 snakes having 35 eggs and 35 and 35 and continuing to multiply by 35?
They're all females.
What's that?
They're all females.
Right. 50. First of all, if you're going to extrapolate, you got to initially go, this animal can have 35 eggs. So 17 of these animals can then have 35 eggs. And forget about predation and everything else that goes on with, these animals. I don't know how old you guys are, if anybody goes back to the gremlins, but they're not gremlins. You can't throw water on them and feed them out of the dark and have them just multiply.
Yeah.
And that's what they made these things sound out like they were going to be. And even the initial numbers of 300,000, most people don't know, back in 2009, when we started this eradication program, the media was talking about 150 to 300,000 pythons in the Everglades back in 2009.
Wow.
And we said, how did you guys come to this number? And so we went to Skip Snow, who was the lead biologist for Everglades National Park. And he said, here's what's happened. We have an area that's called the Frog Pond. And it's a 40-acre parcel of farmland that the state owns. And they lease it out to farmers. And they farm this once a year. But during the non-farming portion of the year, they just let the field overgrow. And then they come in and they disc it up, getting ready to farm it again. So while the field overgrows, they leave all the culls, whether they're growing squash or whatever they were growing out there. And the field overgrows and pretty much becomes a massive rodent field. Mm-hmm. All these rats come in to eat what's there and nest in all the bedding material and everything like that. And then at the beginning of the year, they disc it up. And what they decided to do, I think it was 2007, was they disked it up and they counted the pythons that they disked up in the field. And I don't know what the exact number was, but on the 40 acres, it was somewhere between 20, 25 pythons. Okay. They then took that number and extrapolated python per acre on 40 acres over the entire Everglades.
Man.
Which is what, 99% water? You know, the pythons will use the water to travel, but the pythons are on the levees or the deer islands or the farmlands they're not in the water.
Mm-hmm.
Sawgrass trails where everybody's at. And they extrapolated, and I said, that would be like me on my 14 acres putting out a deer feeder and counting 20 deer and then extrapolating over the entire state of Florida. You have a billion deer.
Yeah.
You can't put a feeder out there and have all the animals come to the feeder and then count it and extrapolate over the landmass that they're on. And that's where the numbers came from initially. There was really no science behind it. It was a shock and awe.
Yeah.
Let's get people to not release their pets. Pythons are scary. And, you know, go down to the Everglades sometime and get on one of the airboat tours. Go take an airboat tour. The airboat tours are going to go out, and at some point, if it's a good operator, not legally, but if he's good for the tourist industry, he's going to go out and he's going to shut off the airboat. And a bunch of alligators are going to come up to the airboat. And the reason they're going to do that is because the more alligators you see on the airboat, the better his tips are. So obviously, he's feeding the alligators. Probably not going to while you're there, but he's got each airboat guy has an area where he knows these alligators are going to come up to the airboat. Over the last 100 years, we've been keeping records of alligator attacks on humans in Florida. Do you know how many fatalities we've had? 28.
In 100 years.
In 100 years, 28 fatalities. Okay? We get more than 28 shark attacks on our coastlines in Florida every year. But 28 fatalities. That's not injuries or fights or anything. That's fatalities. But to me, that's a really low number for what people think alligators do. Really low number. Now, we have laws against feeding both our American crocodiles and our alligators here for that same reason. We don't want people getting bit or getting injured. But what I told Fish and Game is the day you can go out on an airboat, shut it off, and shake a rat off the end of a bow, and the pythons come to the boat, then you have a public safety issue. Because right now, we may have a conservation issue, we may have a perception issue, but we do not have a public safety issue because since 1992, the injection of those pythons to present, we do not have a single incident of injury of a human to a python, with the exception of any of these guys that are going out and capturing and getting bit during a capture. With a single person walking through the woods that has been bit by a python, that has been grabbed or constricted, not one. And the whole public perception, what they've done is this fear mongering is that these things are going to eat and kill everything. And it's funny because every time you take a news crew down there, they're saying there's 300,000 of them. When are we going to see one? When I left in 2015, the average, we were tracking boots on the ground to captures. The average boots on the ground to every python capture was 400 hours.
Wow, that's a lot.
400 hours of guys walking through the swamp to every python catch. That's what we were logging in when they were claiming there were 300,000 pythons out there.
Wow.
Most people that come down to catch a python never see one.
Nope, I tried.
So you've been down.
I found one, Greg. Sorry.
It's just not what they make it out to be, unfortunately. And by putting in all of these restrictive laws and everything else, it makes it more difficult, and it creates a black market. And that's one of the things. I've got 21 years of law enforcement. There is not a thing on this planet that we have outlawed that has disappeared.
Yep.
From drugs to gambling to prostitution, all you're going to do is create. So I have no problem with better regulation, more inspections, people having to go ahead and show that their enclosures are proper, the animals are properly taken care of. I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with bans when they start banning things and saying, or The ban here in Florida, the big deal is they move things up to what they call a Class 1 license, which can only be held for commercial purposes, which means you have to be an educational facility or a zoo. And my argument is put in a stipulation of criteria for both the enclosure and the individual. And I don't care if you're commercial or not. If you meet those standards, you should be able to house those animals. If you have the proper education and the proper, I don't care if your standards have to be what Disney standards are. And if I can meet those as a private citizen, then I should still be able to maintain lions, tigers, or anything else. If I have to, and here in Florida, we have standards on land mass. You have to be on a minimum of 5 acres to have a Class 1 animal. Great, I meet that. You have to have so much perimeter fencing. Great, I'll put that up. Otherwise, I can't have the animal. But just because I'm not a commercial zoo doesn't mean I don't have the ability to take care of that animal. What it means is you don't want to spend the money enforcing it. And our government is not here. We're not here to make their life easy. They're here to make our life easier. And that's the problem. They put laws into effect. In the state of Florida, you can't go out and take common snapping turtles from the wild. And the only reason you can't do that is because they don't have enough intelligent people that can identify an alligator snapper from a common snapper. They don't want you to mix up. Well, considering the alligator snappers don't come out of the panhandle, I think if you're in Miami, it's not a problem. But they've put that law into effect because they don't have enough biologists that can identify one turtle from the other to make sure that what's being done is legal. And quite frankly, in my belief, that's not my problem. You, as a government, need to put those people or educate those people so that, they can do that. And I get it. They have to regulate every species from insects to plants, to birds, to, mammals and all of that. And it is difficult. But, there's a lot going on that doesn't make sense. But unfortunately, we are in a democracy. As far as reptiles go, overall, we are the majority. And like I said, I believe it was Thomas Jefferson that said, a democracy is 2 wolves and a lamb deciding what's for supper. And liberty is a well-armed lamb. Unfortunately, we're the lamb in this instance because every single old person that's scared of snakes is going to vote on a ban of anything that scares them.
Yep.
Fortunately, they're the ones that are going to go to the polls too.
Religiously, for sure.
That's going to happen. So enough fear mongering, and that's why with the facility that we're opening up here, we are not going to affect the masses with what we do, but the individuals that do come here are going to get an experience. All of our exhibits designed for people to walk into. There will be no barriers between you and the animals. There will be a guide, myself or Zoe will be guiding as far as that, but you will be in the enclosure with a 20-foot reticulated python or a 7-foot water monitor as you go into these enclosures walking through. And there will be animals that you will be allowed to interact with, and there will be animals that, although there won't be any caging between you, that you won't have any physical contact with.
That's awesome, man.
And the people. And, that's it. A lot of the zoo facilities are getting away from keeper contact with the animals. And, God, that's why every keeper becomes a keeper, is to be able to interact with the animals. And, one of the things I argue a lot is there's 2 issues we have to look at when we look at safety of animals. You have public safety, which is first and foremost. We got to make sure that nobody from the public ever gets hurt from one of these animals. But then you have occupational hazard. But the keepers don't fall into that. The keeper bit, that's an occupational hazard. That's not a public safety issue. Public safety is when somebody comes to my facility and they become injured at that point. And that's the difference that I think people need to understand. As an electrician working on high power lines, there's a good chance I could get electrocuted. But that's not a public safety issue. That's an occupational hazard.
Right.
I personally don't have any desire to skydive. But if you want to do it and your parachute doesn't open, that's an occupation. That's not, as long as you don't fall on me, we're good.
Right.
Don't kill anybody below you, you're good. And I don't think, with too many of these things, we talk about public safety and everybody throws out all these what ifs. But where are the numbers? Even in large constrictor fatalities, can it happen? Absolutely. Venomous fatalities? Absolutely. But what are the numbers? When I talk to non-reptile people that are freaking out about the 6 venomous snakes we have here in Florida, I haven't met anybody that's not in the reptile industry that personally knows somebody that's died from a venomous snake bite.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're in a first world country where that doesn't happen.
Right.
If you're going to go play with a taipan with no antivenom, you may have an issue. But if you get bit by an eastern diamondback rattlesnake in the United States, every single hospital has crowfab. They have the antivenom. You're good to go with that. And Australia is another one. 23 of the top 25 deadliest snakes live in Australia, and their fatality rate is as low as ours. For snake bite. But first world country where they have the antivenom, they have the treatment. It's not pleasant. I've never, in over, 35 to 40 years, well, more than 40 years actually now of me doing this since I was 7. I've never been envenomated. We maintain a small collection of native venomous here for educational purposes. But again, that's something I'm very careful with. I cannot say the same for incidences with alligators. I have had serious trauma.
So that scar.
Yeah, I'm surprised nobody's asked about the.
I was going to ask, do people ever call you RoboCop? Come on.
So when I retired that year, right after that accident, I fully retired in 2013 from law enforcement. So the whole RoboCop didn't come into it. But my X-rays do look like Wolverine. I mean, I do have metal plates there, and
they look pretty cool, man.
So it's definitely a intense story. With that, the most, and it's crazy too because. When I was 7 years old, I fell on a broken fish tank on the same arm. The C portion of this scar was actually when I was 7. And so when they did the fasciotomy, they just connected to the old scar and opened me back up again. But at 7 years old, I fell on a broken fish tank and cut 7 tendons in that arm.
Ow.
Had to have that reconstructed at 7. And then at 17, I was in a bad car accident where my face went through the windshield. The only reason the rest of me didn't go through the windshield is the engine came through the firewall and laid my kneecap up on my thigh. So I've had some serious traumas, but none as bad as watching my arm get twisted up to my elbow by an alligator. And the car accident, I lost my short-term memory for 3 days. So there are little tiny bits and pieces of that I remember, but most of that is gone from my memory. At 7 years old, I have a pretty vivid memory of that accident, but the alligator accident, for a number of years, I had nightmares or even daydreams where I could see the whole thing happening in slow motion.
Yep.
And when those 2 bones broke, it sounded like a shotgun blast to me when that happened. And I couldn't believe how much it took out of me. Physically, after that, I said afterwards, if they'd have amputated my hand, the rest of my body probably would have healed faster than having to heal that whole thing back, because my hand was literally twisted around more than 360 degrees, where tendons, ligaments, everything was cut off. It was about 3 months before I could even touch my pinky to my thumb again, and a full 6 months before I could use my hand.
Yeah,
man.
I shout out to Robin Markland, who helped set all this up, helped us get into contact with you. I read his description in the story on the Reptile Report, and it was pretty in detail. And so I read that and I was like, it's pretty intense. This is You know, like, and for you to recount it even in that way. I mean, I've had some, maybe not as bad, definitely, but I've had some injuries in my life, and I thought about them for a long time afterwards. So I understand what you're going through a little bit.
Yeah, it's the closest thing that I could associate in my life to something truly being diagnosed as PTSD, because it was really difficult to sit and think about that and see in my head, because that all happened in probably a tenth of a second to a second, and in my head it's just stretched out. I can see it almost in slow motion happening. And had my son not been there, I'd have lost my hand. There's no doubt. I mean, he was 12 at the time. He's going to be 19 next month. And had he not been able to cut me free and keep his wits about him at that point, I'd have lost my hand. There's no doubt. And putting that back on would have been a mess, because it's one thing to cut it off. It's another thing to twist it off.
Yeah.
And try and construct all of that. So I got really lucky.
For our viewers,
story. Listening to this podcast, I was transporting a nuisance alligator that I had trapped the night before. I had I tied a rope around the snout to tie it into the truck, and I made the mistake of using the rope as a handle to try and drag the alligator. And the alligator went into a death roll and locked my hand into that rope. The alligator was taped. I never got bit. He went into a death roll, broke both bones in my forearm, and twisted my hand up to my elbow. And I ended up with compartment syndrome when I went into surgery, which is where the limb swells so thick that the blood can't flow anymore. And they have to do a fasciotomy where they cut the skin open to relieve the pressure so that the blood could flow, so I didn't lose my arm. The massive scar is not from the alligator, not from a bite. It's pretty much all from the surgeon opening my arm back up. The actual marks on my arm were only a 2-inch laceration where the compound fracture had skin. So,
man.
It was intense. Not near as bad as the multitude of alligator bites that I've sustained. That was the worst injury, and it came from a tape alligator. So even with those, when we work with alligators now, I'm more worried about the ropes, getting tangled, or people wrapping their hands around the ropes. If anybody wants to go to our Gator Gardens Facebook page, they can check out, about a month ago, we did a video removing Joker out of the pond. I think there's a short video on there. And he literally pulls me and my son and my daughter into the water. And it's kind of a funny video, because my kids have been raised around this, and they've always got my back. And they had a bunch of friends helping us. We just needed, a lot more weight on the end of the line. So they had some friends helping us. And it's really funny to watch the alligator pull me into the water, and my 2 kids run in behind me, and their friends run in behind them, and then realize there's more alligators in here. And they all haul butt and leave my kids. Whoop. I got a fix this right here. I got a 2-year-old that just broke away. Come here, Lennox. Come here. Come here, baby. Come here. Come here. Shh, shh, shh. No crying. Look. Say hi. Say hi. Say hi.
Hey, what's up, buddy?
All right. With mommy, and I'm going to stop. Okay. Okay. Say bye. Say
bye, buddy. See ya. Don't get a top rope on that guy. He'll take your arm off.
So I don't know how much editing you guys do, but anyways.
Not a lot. This will all be in there.
Yeah. This is all great.
So,
it's great.
We're all just real people, man.
Yeah. Yep. But so that was, like I said, they could check that out. They could see Joker kind of jerk us all in the water, and it's funny just watching my kids have my back, because I had no idea until I watched the video who stayed with me and who wasn't, because I'm focused on the animal at that point. But it was really funny to watch everybody run in and just my 2 kids stay with me, and everybody else run out.
Yeah.
on the video, but it's a lot of fun working with those guys, and I don't know.
So speaking of crocodilians, how many American alligator morphs are you working with now?
I think we got 5 here. The albinos, the melanistics, the piebalds, the hypos. I am missing something off the top of my head.
Leucistics? Are you working with leucistics?
There are no leucistics in private collections that I'm aware of. They're all zoo, AZA. The original group was owned by the Audubon, and some of those have been sold off. You had a couple that were floating around. The one Robbie Kesey had that was either stolen or burnt in the fire.
Yeah.
There was an odd leucistic that St. Augustine had, but that animal passed. That's one of the things I do pretty much keep track of. So leucistics is a morph that we would like to get. Obviously we get into it, and then I'm also aware of 3 T-positive albinos, which as adults look quite a bit different than the normal albinos. As babies are really hard to tell apart, but none of the 3 facilities that have those animals currently are willing to part with them at this point. And each of those facilities only has a single animal. And I have not even been able to find out what the sex ratio is on those. But that would be something, obviously, we would like to get into and work with on those. Downside, the real downside to the crocodilian genetics is their life cycle is very similar to humans, in the sense that at 51 years old, there's a lot of stuff I'm never going to see produced, because these animals need to be 7 to 10 years old to produce. And what we're finding out is their peak production tends to be between 15 and 35.
Wow.
So to raise them up to get that type of fertility, how many generations can you go?
Yeah.
With that, they're not ball pythons, they're not colubrids, not something that you can pump up. Although you can, create your sex ratios by incubation, it is quite difficult to produce males in any type of number. Your lower temperatures create females. You have this optimum area for males, and then you get back to females again. And it is difficult to produce males as far as that goes. But again, the plus is you don't need as many. Breeding them in groups like that. But there's very little research on people breeding them. Alligator farmers typically don't breed alligators. Most of what they get, they harvest from the wild. It's legal harvest, and whatever they pull off of the farm is kind of whatever they get. They normally just put in big ponds and stock them with large numbers of alligators, which doesn't yield a whole lot of offspring. So we've been doing some research locally. We live on Fish Eating Creek, which is a waterway that feeds into Lake Okeechobee. So we monitor the alligator, their production nests on the creek here and a lot of the local lakes, and then work with a lot of the guys that harvest wild eggs as well, and are looking at the data for some of these animals and clutch sizes and breeding ratios. Things are different in river and canal systems versus lake systems. Males tend to breed, from what I've seen so far, less females in these river or canal systems than they do in the lake systems, for the simple fact that they set off their territories, and within a river or canal, the territory is very defined. When you have a very large open lake, the territory is whatever you can defend at that moment. Because those animals can move around. So there's probably a lot more animals copulating in those areas than in the rivers and stream type areas.
I'm gonna show you the audience here real quick, and just something that you produced.
Yep.
Freaking awesome, by the way.
Yeah, that to have those little white dragons hatch out. I mean, that is really amazing.
So how many years of work was it to get that to happen?
So this, I believe, will be our 6th consecutive year producing albinos. We started with our first male. We got Jack back in 2008. And when we got him, we had no plan of breeding. That was not the plan. I wanted that animal, and then started talking with some other buddies of mine, and they're like, "Look, we'll invest in some females." And basically, only one of the initial investors is still a partner with me. Currently, we have Zoe and I own a breeding pair, and then John Rosenstock, Albinos Unlimited, he owns a breeding pair at our facility. And for the first year we only produced from our pair, but so for the last 5 years we've produced from both clutches. And the sort of fertility is steadily going up with these animals as they age. Initially, we thought the poor fertility may have been the albinism itself, but each year we're producing more and more out of those 2 clutches. So hopefully this year they're building nests as we speak right now. They should be laying eggs within the next 2 weeks.
And you were saying you think the fertility issues is age related, like maturity?
Yeah, I think captivity and age. So all of these albinos were born in captivity. A lot of them were raised up in the back of a zoo. Off exhibit animals typically don't get the same care. Not that they're neglected, but obviously you want what's on exhibit to be the best looking animal. So if you've got whole prey items versus raw meat, the raw meat's probably going to go to the animals in the back. The whole prey items is probably going to go to the animals on exhibit because you want them to look, the best. So a lot of these animals had captivity for a while. Their diet wasn't the best. Captivity, diet, and age, I think, are the contributing factors because our, like I said, numbers are rising, and nobody's really bred alligators in the way we're doing it. We're breeding them in pairs or trios in isolated enclosures versus just throwing them out in the swamp and not knowing who the sire is, with all of these animals. And again, if it does come to a point where they eliminate the wild egg harvest, somebody's going to have to, if they're going to keep the alligator meat and hide market up, they're going to have to figure out a way to breed them, captivity.
Mm-hmm.
That's productive. And we may just, that's not our goal, but in working with these mutations and having to know who the male and who the female is and isolating these breeding groups, we may actually come up over the next 10, 15, 20 years with some really good solid breeding programs for alligators and other crocodilian species.
So what would be the average clutch size you would be looking at on these albino pairings?
We're producing between 35 and 40 eggs per clutch.
Okay. And is this albino to albino, or are you working with hets?
Nope, these are albino to albino.
Okay.
So we have been producing hets, and we are raising up hets to, with the albino enclosures. If you are going to keep exhibit enclosures that are crystal clear, then you have to have some type of shade cloth, because if you're going to keep the albinos clean and in crystal clear water, they will burn, and they think they're alligators. They will lay in the sun like a regular alligator. If you're going to keep a more clouded water, which is what they prefer anyways, they don't like to go to the bottom and be able to see out. They like dark, murky, tannic algae water, and natural enclosures where they're going to be in the mud and you're going to allow algae to get on the animal. That will prevent a lot of the sunburn. So our breeders, if you were to look at a photograph of one of our breeders currently, they would have algae all over their body. You can tell they're a white alligator, but you'd see all the algae. You don't see the algae on a dark alligator because of its dark pigment. And usually the algae gets in between the scales and the scutes on the animals. It'll grow across their snout. But if you ever capture a wild alligator and put your hands on him, he's covered in slime pretty much. And that, I think, helps protect the albinos. So if, for most people, you have an animal of that value, you want it in a place where people can see it, and you want crystal clear water. And so either an indoor enclosure or a covered enclosure with, shade cloth or trees. We built our initial breeding pens up under oak trees, so the alligators get down in sun. But we also don't, unless we're having somebody come over for a specific reason, the breeding enclosures are not kept with crystal clear water. The alligators would much rather be in that dark, murky water with them. Trying to explain that to people, they just think it's a dirty pool because they're used to seeing everything at a zoo be crystal clear. But our lakes, rivers, and streams down here aren't like that either.
So what is the market like for morph alligators? Because it would be a very specific buyer. Like, I wonder, because I've never done it, what's that like?
So I think the market is going to be a lot stronger in Europe. The simple fact that it's an exotic for them. So, I mean, here it's a native species to the United States, not, all 50 states, but it is a native species. So it does have a lot more interest over there. It's not going to be ball python. It's not going to be the next thing that takes off. Again, once other individuals are in production, the price will probably come down fairly quickly. Right now, we control it. For the last 5 years, we've been the only producer in the world.
Oh, wow.
So Sean Heflick was he produced for, I think, 3 years. And then the female that he had producing died. And to my knowledge, I don't know what his production has been since then. I'm not aware of any other than the animals that we've produced. A handful may come out of the wild out of Louisiana every year, alligator farms, maybe 3 or 4 that way. And depending on the farmer, depends on whether or not they kill the animal, because they're farmers, not herpers. And again, they throw them in with the rest of the alligators. They probably don't do so well. But, there's right now we kind of control. As far as the other mutations, no other mutation has been proven yet. We're hoping within the next 2 years to prove out the hypos, the pieds, and the melanistics. And then the leucistics and the T
you have a
positive.
pastel?
Wow. What's that?
Oh, and the alligators. You said you had 5 mutations we covered for them. Was your 5th one a pastel? I think you posted not too long ago, or
No, those are the hypos. We call them golden gators. They're if they're kept inside, they will stay almost a cream color, whitish yellow and black. They almost look axanthic if you didn't know what you were looking at. Some people refer to them as axanthic. And we have a fairly good sized group of those that should breed next year. And then we've got the melanistics. I was trying to think. Here we've got all of our normal alligators, with the exception of our big nuisance gators that we train. All of the normal alligators that we have here are albino hets or hets of one of the mutations. We're not producing anything that's just normal for the pet. Again, I'm not looking for people to get. Alligators are something that people will raise up and then let go. And fair to the alligator, it's not fair, to the individual. Eventually, we will start doing training courses here for individuals that want to either get the hours here in Florida to be licensed to legally possess those animals. And, with that type of training, we definitely want to go over enclosure, longevity, all that kind of stuff with the people to make sure that they have the right, tools. Here in the U.S., we offer a trade back program on the albino alligators. So if anybody purchased an alligator from us, as long as the alligator is raised properly, if it reaches a point that becomes too big, we will go ahead and trade it back out for another hatchling. And that was a program I think that we started that I think is it does give me an outlet for sales, but I think it's also responsible. If somebody's going to pay that kind of money for an animal, I don't see them running out and letting it loose and if we're going to offer to go ahead and take the animal. But part of the stipulation on the trade back is that dietarily and structurally the animal is maintained properly. There's a lot of problems with alligators in captivity, and we don't know exactly whether it's enclosure or diet or a combination, but you can look at a lot of captive alligators and they have what I call a jaw roll, those bottom teeth. When an alligator closes his mouth, if his dentition is correct, the bite structure is correct, you should only be able to see his top teeth hanging down. The bottom teeth all fit up in the little grooves and sockets in the roof of the mouth. And what we've noticed in captivity, you'll see it at a lot of alligator farms and zoos and things like this, is the bottom teeth start to roll out so that the teeth either meet or sometimes the bottom teeth come above the top teeth. And it appears the whole jaw is rolling out. And we haven't totally figured out what the problem is, because I have had other facilities maintain juvenile alligators in a very similar setup to mine and feed the same diet that I feed, and we are not having the jaw roll. The only difference is their platform on these juvenile animals have a ramp that is hard, either cement or wood. And my animals do not. They have a drop off. They either have to be out of the water or in the water. And we don't know if the weight, that is one of the things that you'll notice with Temiscama, Gharial, any of your slender snouted crocodilians. A lot of facilities built these concrete pools that have these concrete lips, and the crocodiles will lay with their snout on the lip. And over time, it arches the snout ends up being like a U, it bends because of the weight of doing that. And in the wild, they don't have that. They have a gradual slope or a drop off of sand or mud or muck or whatever it is. And so one of the things, if we're going to take an animal back on trade, we want to make sure that the animal is structurally sound, because it's going to go on exhibit someplace else, at that point. But, that allows people to maintain these animals until they're in that, 3, 4, 5 foot range, depending on the person and what they can handle and maintain, and then still have an outlet for the animal to come back to a facility like ours or go on display in a much larger exhibit, and then have them, work with another animal.
That's pretty cool. That's a good idea.
That really is.
So,
Dave, you've been pretty quiet.
I've been quiet. Well, I talked for the first hour. I'm letting you guys have some fun now. And actually, it's not that I've been quiet. Graziani has shut the fuck up the whole time, so I can't really say anything. But no, you guys keep doing your thing. I'm good over here. I mean, I'm gonna move into a couple subjects to kind of wrap it up in a little bit. And
Yeah.
interesting. Well, Eric apparently brought an animal back with him from the
Just
group.
for you, Greg.
For you,
Just for
apparently.
you.
So, when we get to the end of this, we're going to see it. And just so everyone who's watching, we're not keeping the thing. We're going to show Greg, and we're going to go back to wherever we found it. We're going to let it go. But I'm hoping it's interesting. It's probably a ring neck. I'm thinking it's a ring neck, because we found some ring necks today. But we'll see what happens.
We went herping through you today. Yes.
I think my favorite herping story with Greg, you remember years ago, we left from your backyard in the canoes, and we were cruising along. And at one point, Greg was like, "Hey, this is my neighbor's fence that we're going over right now." And we were looking down. He told me that they'd had a lot of rain, but I mean, it was like crazy flooded. And we were seeing alligators just go right by the canoe. And it was me and you and Neil Golly and Justin McCrare. So, yeah. And that was the first time I ever. Go ahead.
You got your first crayfish snake?
Yeah. You and I, we got it, and we brought it back, and we ID'd it. Yep. Have you found a rainbow snake yet down there?
No rainbow snakes, man. I've got people at the University of Florida still coming down and looking, but I think it's been the 50s or 60s since anyone found one here.
Yeah.
So,
well, maybe in your area. I think there was actually some this past year in Florida where there was a report of one being found. I saw some pictures not too long ago in a herping group. I'll look it up and send it to you.
Is the theory here with the rainbow snakes is one of their main diets is an eel that no longer has access to the creeks here because of the locks and weirs they put into Okeechobee. So there's a species of eel that would come in from the ocean in through the lakes and rivers and spawn in the Fish Eating Creek in those areas. And since they've put in, I don't know, back when the Corps of Army Engineers put in the weirs and everything, it's stopped those animals from coming in. And they think that was a major staple speed diet, for the rainbow snakes. But that's just one of the theories, with pesticides and pollution and everything else that's going on.
Okay. Well, Ben, your mouth's moving. You got something to say, buddy?
Of course, I got tons of stuff. I always have stuff.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going, but you go ahead, do your thing, buddy.
Well, I was gonna go to a fun story, but why don't we? I want to make sure we get this in. Can you give our listeners your top 5 tips? This is one of the questions I sent. Your top 5 tips if they're starting a ball python breeding hobby or business.
So the first tip that I would give is diversify your collection. I would talk to people when we had these $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 ball pythons, when the bananas came out and all the crazy prices and the scaleless and all this stuff that people were paying ridiculous money for. If you're wealthy and you've got more money than God, knock yourself out. But if all you have is that to spend, do not put it into one project. Diversify into as many projects as you can would be my first on a business site, because things are going to go up and down. Like we were talking about earlier, the leopard kind of dropped off till it got in with the clown. And all it takes is somebody to go ahead and make something that nobody ever thought of before. And the next thing you know, that jumps up and this other project kind of drops. So if you have your eggs all in one basket, it's going to be a little more difficult, as far as that goes. More and more people now are seeing, time being a factor, and they want to get into projects that are going to hold their value. So obviously, your recessives, again, that's what we've decided to do with that. So maintaining a good diversity of recessive genes is going to hold the value for quite a while. As far as other tips in the industry, see as many facilities as you can if you're getting started. Most people that are into this like to show off what they have. They may want to get first because people don't want their facilities broken into, or things like that. They may have some trade secrets or whatever. But get to as many facilities as you can, and ask questions when you see something that you've never seen before. Ask first of all what it is and why they're doing it that way. One of the things that I saw years ago in a facility was I thought they were retractable air hoses, but it was actually water lines. Years ago we used to go through and with a squirt handheld mist bottle and mist snakes. I have 2 50-foot hoses. When I built my new facility, I actually had spigots put in under the sink so I could have hoses that I can walk anywhere in the room and I can fill water, with just a spray nozzle. I can click it to a mist and mist the snake, or I can fill up the water bottles, or I can hose something off or do that. Little tricks and things like that. For me, everything in my snake building has to be on wheels. Mm-hmm. My racks, my carts, my everything, because all it takes is one loose rodent to run under something. And if you've got stationary objects, you're tearing the whole room apart to try and get that rodent. I like everything on wheels. I can wheel it around. I can move it around. Things that people don't think about. If you're just starting, it makes it a lot easier to document things. Documentation is huge. Every single animal in our facility gets an ID number. All of our crocodilians are pit tagged, so they're actually scanned. We don't go as far as pit tagging the ball pythons, but every single ball python in my facility has an ID number. An inspector can walk in and look at my inventory and ask to see any specific snake, and we can then point that out. And the ID system that I use, if anybody's interested in using it, I have no problem sending it or sharing it. It's a series of acronyms. My ID system lets me know what the genetic makeup of that animal is. It allows me to know the year of birth. And then there's a sequence of numbers that just allows me to know where it was in the hatching of that year. And the way the system's been designed is it is never duplicated. The number is never duplicated because at least the year changes in the animals that are produced with that. So designating that allows you, when something does pop up down the road. I mean, God, we've been breeding ball pythons for over 30 years now. So, if something pops up, we can go back and I can track it back all the way. Like we talked about those original Pastels. I can track back every single baby that she's ever had, on her records, because we've kept those records with all those animals. And now with all the scanners and digital stuff, it makes it a lot easier. But it's a whole lot easier to start with 5, 10, or 15 snakes doing that than to start with 1,000 and having to go in and implement a whole system or change your system. As far as that goes. But it's happened to me. I've changed my system because I've just found something that's better, over time with that. So I guess, diversification is the big one. See as many places as you can, talk to as many people as you can. Be as humble as you can. I still love talking to people that have been into this for less than a year, and I learn things because it's a fresh set of eyes. They see things, get away from it. That's the way we've always done it. I do that with Zoe right now. She'll ask a question. I'll be, I've done it that way forever, but why? And then I got to stop and think about it. And there was a reason at some point. And sometimes she comes up with a better reason. Why don't we do it this way? I never thought. And the other great thing is, I'm glad, like I said, I've taken kind of a 3-year hiatus, and to come back and see so many people still excited about ball pythons has kind of re-energized me, got me back into it, really excited about it. What I want people to know is somebody that gets into ball pythons 10 years from now still has the ability to produce something the world has never seen. Everybody's like, oh man, you've been doing this so long, you're going to produce stuff. I'll never catch up to you. I'll never produce a world's first. What people don't understand is when you start working with Punnett squares is every time you add a new gene, your Punnett square gets multiplied by 4. So, and I have this listed down. I think I broke it down maybe to 11 genes. Wow. If you produced an animal that was homozygous for all 11 genes, it was like a quadrillion to 1 odds of producing that animal. And when you start breaking that down, I mean, just when you get into double hetch, you're at 1 in 16, and then you get beyond that and you're at 1 in 64, and you're getting 5 eggs to that. People don't realize how many things are out there. Not only do these people like myself that have been doing it over 30 years and been doing this, not only do we not have the space and ability to produce everything that could possibly be produced with the genes we have now, but we don't even have the mind power to think it up. The cool thing is you guys are going to think of something that I never thought of even putting together. And that's what's so cool about the ball pythons is we don't just have 4 mutations that it's already all been done. We're constantly coming up with new mutations and things, and God, there's got to be over 100, maybe 200 mutations. And again, when I first got started, I can remember people going, what are you doing? These are garbage animals. What are you doing with ball pythons? Going back to the start of the ball python boom, there was myself and 2 other individuals that were collecting ball pythons before anybody else was doing it. And it was myself, Kevin McCurley, and Brian Barzak. And most of the ball pythons were coming in from 2 places. They were either coming in from Strictly Reptiles down in Hollywood, Florida, imported in, or they were coming in from LA Reptiles. Not as much from LA. Most of it was coming from Strictly. And I lived right around the corner from Strictly. And Brian and Kevin, this was before anybody, Bob Clark or Brian or anybody was going over to Africa to handpick stuff. Nobody was doing that. It was all coming in through Strictly. And they were sending jobbers to go pick out anything weird and send it up to them. And they were buying it sight unseen. If it was weird, send it up. You know, when you bought ball pythons from Strictly in 100 lot, depending on the time of the year, you were paying between $3 and $8 a snake. Depending on the you know, at the beginning of the year, you're paying more. Towards the end of the year, the snakes have been sitting there for a while. You know, you're paying $3 in 100 lot. So they were buying 100 lots, and they might be paying $50 or $100 for an odd snake to sight unseen. And I was lucky enough to go down there and hand pick, and I hand picked out the very first cinnamon ball python, the cinnamon pastel that started my bloodline. And the pastel was actually hand picked by a jobber that pulled it aside, and I traded him an albino Burmese python for that animal.
That's awesome.
Wow.
And
were you like Kevin and Brian? Suck it, I got this. Right off your jobber.
They were trying to buy stuff, and you know, they were. I can't tell you how many things. I have photo albums of animals that went through our hands that we were like, this was really cool. Michael Cole looked through my photo album, and he believes that I had the very first hypoberms that produced the leucistics, and I never bred them.
Mm-hmm.
And a pair of them, I raised them to about 7 feet, and I sold them. And I don't even know. They initially went to the Barkers. I don't know where they went from there. We were calling them cinnamons at the time. I have them in the photo album. I've got belly shots. I've got dorsal shots. I've got the whole thing. And Michael Cole was losing his mind. He's like, you have no idea what you had with these things. And we had all kinds of ball pythons that went through. We had others that we raised up that didn't prove out. For me, the staple was the cinnamon and the pastel. And then I traded in. I literally traded into everything else. You know, from rhinos to pieds to clowns to all of that. You know, and they're what started for me. But you know, hand picking them out of Strictly was fun. Like I said, when that calico retic came in, you know, we got to see it before anybody else was even notified, and we gave them what they were asking on it, and we walked out, you know, with the snake right there, which was ridiculous money. Again, I've made a whole lot more than I've ever spent because I just happened to be in the right place at the right time and being able to trade. I will never forget the first time I saw Cindy Baldago pay $1,000 for a tiger reticulated python. I thought she was batshit crazy. $1,000 for a snake, that was just nuts. This is probably going back to 89 or 90. And I thought, you know what? And then I saw somebody else do it, and I was like, the first person that pays stupid money for an animal is an idiot. The second person that pays stupid money for an animal is an investor, because now we have a group of people doing it.
Yeah.
That's a great mentality.
That's what it was. The first guy's an idiot. After that, you're an investor because other people are doing it. And, you know, the pricing, I can remember when albino ball pythons were $7,500. And I never thought we'd see animals go higher than that. You know, and it's ridiculous, the animals that are sold. I could tell you, I shipped a cinnamon pastel for $10,000 to Chicago, and the shipment got lost in Atlanta in the winter. And I never heard such silence on the phone. We were talking to Delta. We were shipping at Delta, and the buyer didn't get the package. He was calling me. I called Delta, and I said, where's this at? They're like, you know, we're really not sure. I mean, they didn't seem too concerned. And I said, would you do me a favor and look at the declared value of this package? And they saw $10,000. I swear to God, there was 30 seconds of silence on the phone with just paper shuffling. They found the snake in 15 minutes and put it on the next flight, and everything was good. But it was that was the most nerve-wracking shipment I've ever had. $10,000 snake, and and they left it on the tarmac.
Wow.
You know,
Wow.
but
Those
we're
little
always-
those little tidbits of history, like for us coming in, like we've only been doing this for 10 years. Dave's probably been doing it for like 69 years or whatever. But you know what I mean? Those little stories are like, those are really cool. Stressful, obviously, because you had a $10,000 animal lost on tarmac. But like
Yeah.
just hearing that crap, or like how you would go out and look at Strictly Reptiles and pick out these little things for, you know, $3 a clip and, you know, gamble on it like that. Like, I don't know. Those times are lost to us because it's not really an option anymore. We all know the game now, but
Yeah, well, I mean, it was crazy. I walked into Strictly Reptiles, and it's funny because Mike Van Ostren, Ray owns Strictly, and his sons ran it, and Mike runs it now. But they knew I was a police officer for Pembroke Pines, and I don't know how much you guys know about the history, the legalities, and things down there. But they were good friends with Mario from Tiger King and all of that good stuff. And so they weren't real huge fans of law enforcement.
Tiger King.
And it was if you guys haven't read the book The Lizard King, you'll read a lot about
Yeah. That's a great book. That's a great book.
Yeah. So you know, I would come in, and they all sat, the guys in the office had a one-way mirror, and they could see, and I'd be looking around. Mike would get on the loudspeaker, and he'd go, "I smell bacon. There's bacon walking around in here." He always busts my balls. But once the ball pythons got known and the pastels and went in there, I used to go in there and pick out 100 ball pythons. And I'll never forget this. The last time, it was after the cinnamon group I got the following year, I went in there and I picked out 50 ball pythons. Basically, they were just in cardboard boxes, you know, shipped right over from Africa in bags. You just be cracking these boxes and you just be going through them, and they would have tubs that you would put the ball pythons in, big horse troughs and stuff, and you would go through them. You'd have a 5-gallon bucket, so you just fill the 5-gallon bucket up. So I picked between 2 5-gallon buckets. I had 50 little ball pythons. And so I walk up to the register to buy them. And Mike walks up and he goes, "Okay, these are 50 apiece." I said, "What? You told me, I think at this point they were $10 a piece." So they're $10 a piece. He goes, "If you want them now, they're 50. No, I don't want them that bad. I mean, picked out some odd colors, but it wasn't like I had pieds or axanthics or anything, you know, some stripes and some aberrant patterns. I was like, "No, I don't want them." And he turns around and he hands his bucket to the employee, and he goes, "Go set these up individually. These are all $50 snakes." The employee looked at him. He goes, "Greg handpicked these himself. They're $50 snakes. Go put them on the rack."
That is so messed up.
I took all the snakes and I was like, all right. So now I had to start sending jobbers in to handpick snakes for me, because if I touched it now, it was worth $50. I couldn't buy anything from Mike.
That's
And
great.
I mean, I laugh about it. Because what's funny was I really didn't have anything in there that was worth, you know, I mean, then a regular ball python, you know, retail was $50. So that's what he put. He put them all at the retail price.
Wow.
To sell them for that. But it was like, you know, and I never did this, but I just thought, you know, I should go in week after week and just pick out garbage and let them put it on the shelf for $50. Because I picked it out. Pick out the stuff that I know is never going to produce.
Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious.
It didn't happen. But, you know, the other thing, too, that is very different from the way I came into the industry was now you have such specialized portions of the industry that being field herping is its own thing. Eric's going to appreciate this, because 90% of the herpers that I meet now that we consider herpers that breed or whatever have never dealt with a snake in its natural environment. They've started off at a reptile expo. They bought a rack. They bought an aquarium. They set a snake up. They expanded in their basement or their bedroom or their garage. And they've bred and they may have produced 1,000 snakes now. And they have no idea what it's like to go out. I started at 7 years old in 1976. Nobody bred snakes on purpose in any volume. You had your Bill Loves and your Tommy Crutchfields and your Eugene Bissettes that, you know, had stuff together and it bred, you know, but nobody was breeding that kind of stuff. Everything that was sold in a pet store was wild caught. From the time I was 7 till I was 18 years old, I made my money hunting the cow pastures in the Everglades of West Broward and selling snakes to the pet stores by the inch or the foot, depending on the species. You know, your smaller Scarlet Kings sold by the inch. We didn't have corn snakes. We had red rats and yellow rat snakes and Florida King snakes and Brook King snakes and rough greens and garters and ribbons and water snakes, and all of those were sold at, you know, $1.50, $2. You know, your rat snakes and your king snakes might have been $5 a foot.
Nice.
Naturally, they were wanting the biggest thing you could get, and we were catching yellow rat snakes that were 6 to 7 feet. You can't find those anymore, just because of the lack of habitat and everything else. But that's what I did, was I went out and walked and trying to find a rough green snake in Brazilian pepper is ridiculous. You're looking for this flash, and when you see this flash of green, you're grabbing at it before you realize what it is, because they're so lightning fast, you know, in those trees. And that's what I grew up doing from the time I was 7 years old, was actually catching and setting up terrariums of wild snakes. So then to deal with people in the industry that have never gone out and caught a wild snake, or they have raised Burmese pythons and they want to go catch one in the Everglades. It's funny, you don't realize how much they don't know, because you've looked at this person as an experienced individual, but getting them out in the field and doing that, they typically are never looking where you're actually going to find the snakes, because they don't know what they're looking for. You know, it's a total different group of people. And from the 70s to the late 80s, even all the guys that were breeding Burmese pythons, all this, were herpers. They were field herping. They were going out and catching. They were taking trips to Arizona. They were taking trips to South America. They were doing all that kind of stuff. And very few people in the industry now are doing that, you know, or have been there. And luckily, with, you know, the Nat Geo series, I got paid to travel the world for 3 years and see a lot of places that I never could have afforded, or I didn't have the resources to send out enough feelers to find the fixers that were going to take me to where the cobras were in Thailand, or the water monitors, or whatever we were looking for in Australia. That was the most amazing time in my life, and I can't wait to get things set up here, and for Zoe and I to be able to go out and go back to some of those places. And still, I haven't been to the Dark Continent yet. I got to get to Africa. I haven't been there. That's, you know, been to a lot of different places around the world, but I got to get to Africa, and maybe I'll get with Matt Shirley on one of his crocodile expeditions and see what we can do, because he's renaming crocodiles through Africa like crazy. We're about to jump up with or end up with 30 species here pretty soon.
Wow.
I'd love to talk to you about that, because I was a huge fan of the Python Hunters series, and I would love to know what it was like to just like out of nowhere be like dive into that kind of scene of, not only is it chasing after herps, going out herping and stuff like that, but now you're in, you know, quote Hollywood, you know what I mean? Like, what was that experience like? That had to have been crazy.
It was definitely crazy. It was a lot of fun. Here in the States, it was kind of funny because our biggest fans knew me before the show. You know, so it was no big. I was just the guy that had been at the reptile at Daytona for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
The odd thing about it was some of the cult followings overseas. So the largest place that Python Hunters took off was in Canada.
Really?
Canada. Purchased. Canada does not have National Geographic Channel. So we were on, in National Geographic, we were on in 73 countries through National Geographic. We were on in Canada through OLN, the Outdoor Network. And it went so crazy in Canada that Grant called us up to the Canadian Reptile Breeders Expo, I think it was in 2011, as headliners to be there at the show. And when we got there, there was a line wrapped around the convention center of people not to come into the show, to come in to meet us. They had a meet and greet. And there were people that waited 4 to 6 hours to just come in, shake our hands, get an autograph, get a picture with us, and buy a T-shirt. And I was floored. We could not walk through, none of us could walk through the expo without having 4 guys on us so that people didn't stop us every 10 feet. We couldn't go to the bathroom. We couldn't. It was crazy, and it was fun for a weekend. I can't imagine living my life like that. We pulled into, they've got Tom Hortons up there is their coffee shop instead of Starbucks or whatever else. And so we pulled into the Tom Hortons, and we're in this minivan. And thank God I'm riding shotgun. I'm in the captain's chair shotgun. The 2 captain's chairs behind me are Michael and Sean. And when they opened the side door, 3 women dove in on them, going, Python Hunters, and just grabbed them in the van. And I was like, and they were pretty big women. So I was glad not to be trapped in the back of the van because they were excited and they were not letting us go anywhere for a little while. But it was a lot of fun. It was crazy with that. It was interesting being, recognized in Thailand or Australia from somebody that had seen the show. It was really funny. We got recognized by a guy that spoke very little English in Thailand, in Bangkok. He was the customs guy as we were leaving. And I walked up first and gave him my passport. And it was just me and Michael. Sean had taken a different flight out. He had to get back for something. So Michael and I were flying back together. And when he saw my passport, he's like, you the guy from TV. And then Michael came up, and I thought the guy was going to lose his mind when he saw 2 of us after that because, we were right there. And for us, we're just regular people. We're just, having a good time doing what we do and think about it. And one of the things I did learn from it, in doing that, but I had spent quite a bit of time with Nigel Marvin, who has been on Discovery and Nat Geo and, is from England. And one of the things that I noticed with him was whenever we were working with him and he was shooting, if a child came up to him, he always stopped what he was doing and acknowledged whatever, even if the child was just saying hi or asked him a question or whatever else. And the other thing he did that always stuck with me was he always got down on the child's level. He either, if it was a child that was comfortable enough with him picking him up, he would, if it was a small child, he'd pick him up, or he would take a knee and get down and talk to that child that way. And when we did Python Hunters, that was something the 3 of us said that, would happen. And so when we were at that expo and we were walking around and we had the quote unquote bodyguards, if an adult walked up and said, hey, can I get a quick autograph? We would let the bodyguards kind of shuffle them off. But if it was a child or they had a child with them, we always stopped what we were doing and, felt like part of what we were doing is education. And, sometimes the worst thing you can do is meet your hero because you find out they're human.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the things that we never wanted to do to a kid. We never wanted to do to somebody young. And quite frankly, I never want to do it to anybody. But there are just times where I got to get to where I'm going and I stop for every adult that wants to ask me.
Hold on, the hotel is closing. We're gonna take this out to the parking lot, which is actually kind of good because then we can take a look at that animal that Eric brought back for us.
We almost got you on a wife swap too. Remember I recorded that interview for you. We're trying to get you on that show too.
Yep. They couldn't get anybody to come to the house without knowing what they were walking into. They're going to do a wife swap thing and send somebody here. But but they could not get a
Thank you so much, by the way.
When they did that show wife swap, they didn't tell the people what they were walking into. So they were worried that, you know, they would get everything set up and whoever came here walked into a whole pile of snakes would be like, I'm out. That's it. So, that never went through. But yeah, that was crazy. I don't know how that would have worked.
That would have been funny.
Yeah. So really quick. So last week we had Don Patterson on, who is a Canadian breeder and has actually been breeding since 1994. So we might actually have a Canadian base now on this show. You know, maybe like 4 of them. Greg apologizes when he called it Tom Hortons. It's actually Tim Hortons. It's an amazing place up in Canada. Retired hockey player, played for Toronto and Buffalo. He really means well. He's from Florida. They don't have Tim Hortons down in Florida, so we're gonna let that one slide.
Not here, so yeah. Don't want to offend any of the Canadian fans up there. We really enjoyed it up there. I've only been every time I went up because our production company was out of Toronto. So every time we went up there, I think three or four times, but we always went up in September. And you know, the weather in Toronto in September is colder than our coldest day here in Florida.
Oh yeah.
So I look like an idiot all bundled up. In September, they're still wearing shorts in Toronto. You know, they're still walking around in shorts and T-shirts. And, you know, I've got 3 jackets and a duster down to my ankles. I was born in Miami. I currently live in the center of the state of Florida, right at the top of Lake Okeechobee. Farthest north I could ever live. This is it. If you come down to visit from Ohio and Minnesota, and my only question is, why do you live there? I could not comprehend a winter through that. I love to visit. I love to see snow. I just can't imagine getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and going out in that.
It's not great. Not great. I lived in Buffalo, New York for years, man. Even like in high school, you go to bed, you wake up, there's 2-3 feet of snow on the ground, there's a lightning storm, and the school bus still comes to pick you up. You don't get a day off in Buffalo when that kind of stuff happens. Life just goes on.
And I can't. I'll deal with the heat any day. If I move somewhere, it's going to be somewhere tropically around the equator. I can't. Well, not long term. I love, I'll go skiing. I'll go visit. I'll come up for a weekend. No problem. But I couldn't live in it. And there's no reptiles.
Well, there's a couple. I mean, Buffalo, New York, there's a few. Not like Florida. I mean, you guys have a wonderful thing going on there. Even with the invasives, like I even told him, I mean, it's an amazing place to hang out. It's just, honestly, it's too fucking hot for me. I'd melt. I need a little cold every once in a while.
Yeah, see, I go into the incubator for hours, and it's not a problem.
Wow.
Well, you should have did the incubator challenge at Bar Check years ago, where him and his son locked themselves in there and acted like it was being tortured.
Yeah.
But hey, you guys want to see what Eric brought back? Because honestly, I'm kind of curious what Eric brought back.
I do, but also I want to point out for just one second.
We got light.
Dave,
hold on.
I just want to point out for just 1 second. You found the only hotel in America that closes. I just want to say that. Congratulations,
It's not a
Dave.
hotel.
You did it.
It's an inn.
It's an inn.
Yeah, it's an inn.
Well, apparently they said get out.
Yeah, they don't have those down in Florida.
Not this species.
Where's your hook?
Not this
You got your
subspecies.
Oh, it's good. Yeah, you can take it out, tail it, look like a cowboy. You don't want a cowboy?
Wait, can we focus in on Dave's frame here? Let's focus in on Dave.
He might. Give it a second. Give it a second. Wait for that flashlight to come back over. Let's make it about everybody. But
Dave, you got me all excited now. I don't know. What do you want from me?
well, you're excited because you live in New Jersey, and you guys really don't have any herps up there. Like,
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. I hate that we have to keep on bringing up how shitty New Jersey is every episode, but you know, we can keep doing it.
I was up to New Jersey last year. I think we found a tiger salamander. It was really cool.
That's what I'm talking about. And I don't have to drive to Walmart to get internet.
What do I do? Well, how about this? I'm gonna make this very unprofessional or professional, but okay.
You gotta get much closer.
Well,
I'm gonna have to put my
Dude, did he
glasses
take a
on.
dump in there?
No, that's just 2 days of herping in there, buddy. Yeah, go ahead and bring them out.
Oh, we got a copperhead? Is that a copperhead?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Apparently he's a copperhead, so he's gonna be rambunctious. Let me know if it's in frame. I'm not really paying attention to this.
You're good. We just got to get the snake closer.
Not too close.
Okay. Just close enough. Okay, hold on.
Dave, if you could get tagged, this would probably be the best episode we ever had. So
There is no getting tagged, buddy. I got a green cooler block in my hand right now. You remember
That's
I got
awesome, man.
I got that phone that starts with a 1. It's got that pop-out camera on the top.
that's rubbish. You got to pan down, buddy. You got to pan down. I'm only seeing pavement.
There you go.
Wait, up or down if you're seeing
down,
pavement.
down.
Down. There you go.
Hey guys, if you can't see the snake, why don't you say something earlier?
Hey,
See the
look,
snake.
that's awesome, man.
Still looks like a turd. I'm going to be honest.
How about that? Any better? Is it right?
You got to get a downward angle. I'm not
Son
seeing
of a
any.
bitch. Are we there yet?
You're there.
Okay.
Sure, we're there.
That's very cool, Eric.
Yeah.
This will be a good discussion point when you guys have Warren Booth on, because there used to be 5 subspecies and not so much anymore. So that'll be a whole big discussion point with Warren.
Okay.
Wow.
Very cool.
Not as pretty as the Southerns, right, Greg?
Nope, not as pretty. But unfortunately, I'm so far southern, I got to go north to find them.
Wow.
I found a little juvenile tonight too, a little tiny one. Still had the caudal lure tail. So
Did you really?
yep,
Son of a bitch.
this was the big one for tonight. So did 2 passes and found 2 snakes. So not too bad.
Did you go back to the road run?
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yep.
See, I'm over here fucking off with you guys. God damn it! I found ringnecks today.
You're doing better than we are with our herping, man. We would spend 3 hours hiking through the freaking pine barrens, and then only what do we see? 2 fence lizards. That's it.
Yeah, get the fuck out of New Jersey. We keep talking about this.
Calm down, mustache. All right, we're looking for timbers.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're not going to find them. I'm looking forward to the picture.
Oh man, I'm going out right now.
Well, I told you to come visit me. We'll go for timbers, bud. We'll do whatever you want. There's
You won't even
28
give me your address. Don't do that crap.
Well, I'm not going to give you my address till it's time. I don't want you guys sending me any more shit in the mail. But, okay, well, I don't want to do this, but I'm kind of antsy now that he went on and found 2 copperheads after we didn't do very well today. So I kind of want to get back out on the roads. You guys want to go a little longer, or you guys want to call now that I'm standing out in the parking lot by myself?
I was hoping. I mean, if you wanted to hop off, it's fine. As long as Greg's cool. I had a few more questions, but if you're like tired
I'm
of
good.
it,
No, you guys can keep going. But hey, Greg, I'm really sorry I'm cutting you short, man. I hate to do it. I'm fucking standing in this parking lot. I want to go find some snakes. So you guys make the best of the end of this, and I'm sure I'll be chatting to you with you again in the near future.
All right, man. Be safe.
Take care, Greg. Good to see you. Let's go herping again soon, buddy.
Come on down.
All right. Be there in August.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Sorry to cut you guys short, but
You're
you guys
good, man.
enjoy the rest.
it's cool.
See ya.
Later, guys.
See ya.
Later.
So,
Wouldn't be an episode if Dave didn't dip out 20 minutes early.
did you have to go to the bathroom or anything?
I'm good.
All right. We typically go to the bathroom like once, sometimes even twice during the episodes for some reason. Me and Ryan, we drink a lot of water.
Pound the water. I don't know.
And usually when somebody gets up, we just make fun of each other for like 10 minutes. So I did, for us, it's really great to have you on.
Wait. Uncut. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I know I actually wrote down where we're going to be at to cut it off.
You're a freaking professional. Look at you.
Yeah. So it's really great having you on, and I think that there's not a lot of opportunity for us to get people on that are that do so much and been doing it for so long. Can we just have a couple stories? Because I love hearing stories. I mean, you've been telling stories this whole time. Can you tell us a crazy story or a funny story that involves you herping? Like something we had Dave Kaufman on, and he was, he told a funny story about him herping, and everybody's finding these animals in this stack of pallets, and he lifts it up and there's a skunk, like stuff like that. It's just really funny.
Yeah. So I got one off the top of my head that actually I've got a couple. And the funny thing is, Michael Cole and I are really, really good friends, but these funny stories are kind of at Michael's expense.
Quite on.
So if you guys have seen Python Hunters, or anybody wants to look it up, in the first season, there's an episode where we come across a roadkill python.
It's my favorite story ever. I love it.
It's been there for a little while. And this was when I realized that Michael had a huge amount of experience in importing, exporting, and breeding and this and that. But his field experience was limited at the time. And so when we would film with Python Hunters, we had a film crew, and they were, whatever their union rules or whatever, they did 10 hours a day. Well, when we would go down and film in Miami, we would film 10 hours, and then we'd go eat, and then we'd go back out snake hunting again. So the first couple times we did it, we were finding all kinds of stuff. And granted, it's a lot easier to find stuff with just the three of us than a film crew, around us. So we finally talked him into, hey, give us a little handheld camera and let us take that when we go out, because there's going to be some footage that you guys can use. I mean, some crazy shit happens when we're by ourselves.
Right.
So we found this, we were by ourselves. So Sean is actually, manning the camera, and we find this Burmese python, and, we have to have weight and sex and all this information, this data that we've got to collect. And we're doing it all. And so, I said, hey, Michael, go ahead and sex it. And he's like, yeah, okay, this is a dead snake. Should be easy to sex it. And he goes to pop this snake, and when he does, there's no muscle structure. The snake's a little ripe, and the scent gland just explodes in his face. Just rotten, nasty musk just hits Michael in the face. And Sean is videoing, and Sean is right in Michael's face. Michael's eyes are closed. Looks like he's been hit by mace. He's just screaming and yelling. And he's like, give me a towel, give me a towel. The stench is so bad that I'm gagging. And so he's filming me. And I go back to the truck and I grab a towel. And it's funny, whenever we're doing Python Hunters and we stayed at a hotel, we'd always grab a bunch of towels with us because we never knew if we're going to end up in the water or whatever else. So I've got a white hotel towel. And it looks like I'm kind of jacking around with Michael, like not giving him the towel. But the smell is so bad, I'm just looking away, holding my arm out. He's got his eyes closed. He's reaching for the towel. We're both gagging. He's vomiting a little bit. He finally gets the towel. And, Michael's a good sport about it. It's one of the best scenes in Python Hunters. It's really funny.
It's epic.
But even funnier is my daughter now at the time is in middle school. And we're coming back from something about 4 or 5 months later. And there is this big cottonmouth on the road. And my daughter takes a picture of it and sends it to Michael and goes, hey, can you sex this for me? It's dead. And I don't know if you guys have ever been herping or caught, there's no snake that smells worse than a cottonmouth. It gives the worst odor when it gets upset. And so the fact that she sent him a picture of a dead cottonmouth and basically called him out on taste testing it to see what the sex was, just hilarious. So he had to catch flack from my daughter. But there was another time we were filming the show, and we did just the three of us did a lot of road cruising at night. And for the show, we always used my truck because I had lights set up on it in the whole 9 yards. I had a big F-250 Ford diesel 7.3, and we're driving down the road with it. And I got tired one night, so I'm like, hey, Michael, why don't you drive? So he's driving, and I'm sitting shotgun, and Sean's in the back seat. And we're in Everglades National Park, and we're like, snake! And Michael turns the car, and he runs right over the snake. He does this about 3 times. He finally just wipes out a massive green water snake, and we're like, what the hell? So it's about 2 weeks later, we're back out in the glades again, and Michael's like, snake. He's calling out all these snakes, and he's like, oh my God, I just realized what the problem was. We're like, what's the problem? He goes, I just came back from the eye doctor and got new glasses. I wasn't seeing any of those snakes you guys were seeing for the last 3 weeks. I was just bobbing and weaving wherever I thought you guys were pointing. He said, I didn't see any of those snakes.
Oh my God.
For 3 weeks, he was blind as a bat, not seeing anything on the road.
And you let him drive.
He's seeing everything crystal clear. So he comes back with his glasses, and there was a couple of cars ahead of us road cruising. So they had hit this big green water snake. And we walk up, and here's Michael again. Now he's got his glasses on. Well, you know, in your brain, sometimes you see something and your brain has already got a picture of what it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that happened to Michael. And when we walked up, this snake was not what he had pictured. He's like, there's guts and there's 2 heads. What's going on? The female had been hit. A male had come out and started copulating with her. And she's dead, still wiggling. And Michael's mind can't comprehend what he's seeing. And I'm like, Michael, the male's fine. The female's been eviscerated. But the male is breeding her. And he's like, oh my God, we can't film this. This isn't right. This snake is raping this female snake that's just been run over.
That is a rough image. I can understand why he was having a problem putting those 2 together.
It was really funny, but
it's hilarious to hear right now. I can imagine.
We've had some crazy times. One of the funniest urban stories while we're filming Python Hunters was we were coming from Miami and we were going to film in West Palm. We were filming the Nile monitors.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael and Sean was always on the coast, so he would always drive himself. Michael would have to come right past my house to go to Miami, so he would drop his car off, and Michael and I would ride together. And so we were leaving from Miami, driving up to this film shoot. We were on the turnpike, and Michael and I got to talking. And I don't know what we were talking about, something stupid, but we were really into it. When we realized we went 40 miles past our exit.
That's a lot of miles.
That'll happen.
Well, yeah, it's 80 miles round trip to get back to where we needed to be. So the film crew's sitting on the side of the road where we're filming these Nile monitors, waiting for it. We had to call them up and basically tell them, yeah, we got to chatting and went 40 miles out of our way. Wow. So it'll be another 40 miles back just to get to the exit where we were supposed to be. Yeah, it was funny. The 3 of us, we also missed a flight out of Orlando. We were just sitting in the bar just before our flight talking, and we're like, it's 10 minutes till we better go. We found out the hard way that even though the plane is still there at the hangar, once they shut the door, they don't open it back up again, no matter what.
Yeah.
So we're like, we could see the plane. Just nope. And we had to call Toronto. They had to book us another flight.
Man.
Yeah.
Well, that's how you know you're having some good conversation.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that all reptile people like when, and I talk to reptile people all the time. We try to do like a quarterly dinner up until this whole, pandemic thing. But we would do any reptile people in the area. We'd just meet and do dinner, and we'd put it out there and we'd get, like a bunch of people go. And people, they don't talk to anybody about reptiles because of nobody's interested around them, basically, so that when they get, involved with people that are actually like the same stuff, it's just talking all the, going and going, and it's great. It's great. But I can see definitely if you're like getting into a conversation and you're just going or.
heading on down the road, and we were talking, and that's happened to Michael and I a number of times. We've ended up off God knows where doing that. But yeah, it was that was a lot of fun. I mean, filming that show with those guys was just a blast. The opportunities that afforded us to go around the world and see the things and meet the people that we met was just amazing. Again, I'm not looking to get back into it, but if the opportunity ever arose, I would not turn it down. It was, as long as, we've got some control like we did over content, I'm not willing to go out there and sell my reputation or look foolish as far as that. I definitely want to do something that has that, education and conservation flavor to it, not just a, stunt kind of look at me.
Yeah. I think I think the intention, or how sometimes these shows get people hooked, is, selling the idea of an education. Let's, go check out. And your idea of that is totally different from what the network is saying. Well, this is going to get views. This is going to sell views. And I think back to, like, we all watched So I Got Eaten by an Anaconda, and like, we're all texting, like, we're texting Barchek, we're texting like all these people, and we're like, are you watching this? Is this ridiculous? And like stuff like that goes off the rails. It makes everybody look bad, like.
Yeah.
So I appreciate so much that you consider the control that you can have.
That was something for us. And again, if I did something, I'd definitely have to have some control there, or, the thought process is literally just shooting our own series, and once it's done, selling it.
Yeah. Like
that. But again, money, with opening up the zoo here, with everything that we're doing, we're pretty content, with what's going on here.
A
lot of stuff. And I didn't think I'd be running a zoo. But again, we're not going to, our facility is not going to be just an open to the public. It's going to be, designated tours. So we're going to know, ahead of time, the group of people we have coming in. And that'll also allow us to contour the tour to the group that's coming in. So if we have somebody that's extremely knowledgeable about genetics, we'll have that information coming in, or somebody that has experience working with certain animals, we'll have that coming in. And then if we get the complete novice, we'll have that information so that we know, what these people are capable of, and we can offer them the best experience, they can have. And for me, the more hands-on it can be, the more you can actually interact with these animals. I think the more meaningful it'll be, and the more it sticks in people's minds, and the more they want to conserve, these animals. And one of the messages is it's not so much the animals as it is the habitat. Most people understand that. They don't understand that, when I was in Australia, they can produce 2,000 koala bears a year in Australia. They got no place to put them. If they overgraze the eucalyptus trees, you don't have anything at that point. And, you look at our American crocodiles here in Florida, all of their nesting areas are now hotel beaches, where, people tolerate turtles coming out of the water. They don't tolerate crocodiles coming out of the water.
Yeah.
Those are the wrong people, man.
Yeah. We talk about that kind of stuff all the time, oddly enough. Kind of what you were saying earlier about, people don't like seeing snakes. They're afraid, so they'll vote to ban it and things like that. But it's illogical, because you're like, like almost nobody gets killed by snakes in the United States. No, very, very few over 100 years, like you said, with alligators. But 20 people on average die from horses. 30 to 50 people die every year in the U.S. because of dogs. And like,
more people die of vending machines falling on them, like some ridiculous crap.
That's the thing with anything. I like to be kind of logical before people go in. I mean, there's a million arguments, from vaccine to, the pandemic to the animals to, all kinds of stuff. And quite frankly, as people, as long as it's an area we're comfortable in, nobody thinks twice about getting in a motor vehicle, putting on a seatbelt, and driving down the highway. And almost every person I know knows somebody personally that's been killed in a car crash.
Mhm.
But we accept that. That's normal in our society. It's a normal thing to get killed by a snake. Oh my God, that's biblical. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
It's we accept what's normal,
Mhm.
and that's it. And we've made that normal. And the only way to make something else normal is to educate. And quite frankly, starting out with the younger people is the way to educate. And I have to say that is one thing that the Australian government did very, very well, was educate their civilian population to the value of their wildlife. Because every time we went on a snake call in Australia, whether it was a large python in the chicken coop or it was a king brown, every single person we went to when we captured that snake was adamantly making sure that we were going to release it and not kill it. And that
That's
doesn't
awesome.
happen in the United States. In the United States, the sentiment is the only good snake's a dead snake. And
Mhm.
they're not going to call a snake catcher to come out and get a snake. They're just going to kill it. That's it. It's not worth the time, effort, or anything else. And in Australia, they've done a very good job of educating their people to the wildlife and to protecting the wildlife. And so it's rare to find somebody in Australia that is against the wildlife or even feels that because they own a piece of property, they have a right to destroy it. And here in the United States, that's kind of the mentality. If it's on my property and it's a nuisance to me, I can kill it. And I don't care if it's a bear, a wolf, an eagle, a hawk, whatever.
Mhm.
That's kind of the mentality. Not, hey, I moved on to the habitat of this animal. That's not the mentality that we have. And that's why, we're moving endangered species so that we can build something.
Yeah.
And granted, I get it. If you're the guy that owns the property and they find a rare owl on it, a ground dwelling owl, and you can't build your property's kind of worthless at that point. But
Yeah.
I think there just needs to be a little bit more education on lower levels to kind of change the way they are. I mean, quite frankly, I'd be happy if they'd at least get on the metric system, because the rest of the world is.
The balance certainly isn't there. Like we value money over everything. And I don't want to sound non-patriotic or whatever, but there's more value to America than money, in my opinion. So
There is. Well, I think we need to, as Americans and being proud to be here for our country, that doesn't mean we can't take something that's worked somewhere else and take the good elements of that and implement it here. The idea that, like I said, I can't stand the statement that that's the way we've always done it.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things we've done for a long time that aren't right.
absolutely.
So do what's right. And whether it's conservation or education or government, whatever it is, we can always be better. And again, I don't think acknowledging your faults and trying to make your country better is not patriotic.
Absolutely.
I think doing the opposite is unpatriotic. Basically, being stubborn and saying this doesn't work, but I'm going to do it anyways.
Mhm.
And to also do it in the name of your country, no, that's moronic to me.
Yeah.
I'm with you 100%, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I think we just, unfortunately, common sense isn't that common.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is true.
That's the way it is. But overall, I'm very impressed with. Like I said, I took a 3-year hiatus in the ball python industry. I'm excited. It helps that I have a partner now that's very new to it, so everything is new to her, and that's exciting to me again, because I get to kind of relive that. And I will tell you, after over 30 years of breeding ball pythons, when I stopped breeding in 2016, I didn't know if I'd come back to doing it, and I'm really excited at what the future has to hold with it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, man. So, I know we're kind of getting into the 3-hour-ish range here, and you talked a lot about your new zoo and facility. Do you want to tell people, when I know it's going to be hard to expect it to open, but maybe when you're kind of shooting for, and where you're located, and that kind of thing, so that people can.
So the new facility is Florida Gator Gardens, and we've merged. So Graziani Reptiles has merged with Floresian Farms, which is was Zoe's company with the edibles, exotic edibles. We're doing a lot of exotic plants. We're pretty much right now planting a botanical garden area for people to come in. We will have a nursery available, lots of reptiles, alligators, snakes, and things like that. And the big draw is going to be probably the morph alligators and the training that we do with the alligators, the crocodilians that we're going to be having here and getting people to do that. We are in Venus, like the planet, which is right in the center of the state of Florida, at the top of Lake Okeechobee. So we're just below, the Orlando area by about 2 hours. We're 2 hours from Orlando, Miami, Tampa. We're kind of really centrally located right there. We're hopefully going to be teaming up with a lot of other local facilities around here. A lot of Archibald Biological Station is right down the road from us. The Venus Projects is another really cool place. We've got some hunting lodges in the area as well that we're going to work with that do wild game hunts and things like that. But as far as the timing opening up, that's difficult. We were kind of put on hold with phase one. We wanted to get phase one complete with the exhibits, and we're kind of on hold. Probably, shooting for the first of the year now to go ahead and open up. Okay. But again, we don't know what's going to go on with the whole pandemic thing and what's going to be open and what's not at that point. Mm-hmm. In the interim, we may, because we will put packages together. So, pricing is going to depend on the group and what they're looking for. We definitely want to do some instructional courses, both on the plant side of things and the wildlife side of things. So we will do some venomous capture and keeping technique courses. We're going to be doing some crocodilian capture and technique courses, husbandry, things like that for people that are interested. We were hoping to allow people out this year. One of the big things that we're going to open up to people that want to come in through these tours is our hatchings. Very few people let people come into their incubators and things like that.
Yeah.
We are going to do alligator hatchings and ball python hatchings.
Wow.
As we start hatching out some monitors and tortoises and things like that, we're going to allow people to come in and actually hatch animals out. And obviously the different animals, hatching, say, an iguana or an alligator is going to be a whole lot different than hatching a snake, which might take 2 or 3 days to come out versus an animal kind of explodes right out in your hands. So there's going to be a lot of different opportunities for people to do some hands-on things here. And in the interim, before we're totally open, we may set up some lesser pricing just for some small tours, for people that want to do that or are interested. And so, anybody that wants to contact me about that, coming out before we're open, there are some possibilities and some slots for us to do that as well.
That's awesome.
I'd love to do that, man. I'd love to get your whole facility on the YouTube channel, man. I'm psyched talking about it right now.
I said we're on 14 acres here, and it's really pretty piece of property. Nice cypress hammocks, fish eating creek. One of the things I'm hoping to do, we just kind of got into paddleboarding, and there's a lot of big paddleboard clubs and stuff that go out, but most people don't hit the creeks around here because of the alligators. And the alligators really aren't a threat or a problem. It's just obviously most people don't have the knowledge or know what they can and can't do. So we're going to start doing some guided tours on the creek, which are going to allow people to, I mean, if you've ever been on or seen a paddleboard, there's nothing between you and the water.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's going to be a really cool environment to get really up close in some of these areas. And I will say, after spending a week on a liveaboard boat on the Amazon River, some of the river systems we have here are prettier than what I saw down there with the cypress. It's just not necessarily the animals. I mean, you can't beat pink river dolphin and piranha with anaconda and black caiman, but you know, the trees and stuff is just very prehistoric with all the ferns and the cypress and all that. Really,
yeah.
That's awesome, man.
That's great, man. Well, I appreciate you having you on. Is there anything else that, Ryan, do you have any questions more or?
I'm good. I just need the date when we're going down. That's all. You know.
One of these days, Florida's been, you know, in the red at the moment for travel.
Florida's a little tough right now, for sure.
Yeah. Are you guys planning to come down for Daytona in August?
We were talking about it, but we're not exactly sure that it will happen because things have gotten a little squirrely. But
I've a brother and one of my best friends just kind of moved down to Clearwater, and so we now are not far, you know. So I go down there every once in a while, and they're, you know, as you know, like, oh man, everybody's starting to have to wear masks again, like, and all those things and stuff. So around the Tampa area, and
and to come back home, we got to have a 2-week quarantine when we come back, coming from Florida. Like,
Jersey's real strict, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Zoe, her dad lives in Jersey, so
you know.
Yeah, it's.
But, are you planning on doing Daytona?
We're out here in the middle of nothing. I was just joking today. So Zoe has 2 kids, they're 7 and 2. My kids don't live in the house, don't live here anymore. They're older, but we're probably 4 people that have, since this whole thing, we've never worn a mask. We're in the middle of nothing. There's no reason for us to. But it's funny because we're like that, we end up sometimes over in Tampa or down in Miami, and we're like, oh shit, we can't get out of the car. We don't have a mask. They're not going to let us. They're not going to let us do anything here. So
yeah. Jersey. When I went down the last time, Florida just opened restaurants again, and I was like, it's so weird to eat in a restaurant, whereas in Jersey, like, there's armed guards at our Walmarts in some places that are like, you got to make sure you have your mask on, you know. And it's just like, it's such a weird.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're not all supposed to be armed, or like they just happen to have, you know, whatever. But there's definitely security standing in front of some of the areas to make sure you're wearing masks. Like, it's crazy. So are you going to Daytona?
I don't know. The last 3 years I haven't been there. I think I did like 23 or 24 years straight. I forget what it was. But when I took the job as the curator at the zoo, our big hatching festival was the same weekend every year. So the last 3 years I have not been there. I don't think we'll vend. Probably just go hang out and see everybody. It's been a while. I don't know. We'll see what we have inventory wise, and we'll also see what's going on with this, if it's if it's worth doing. But if they have the show, I think we'll go.
Nice.
You know, we're really, really close with Carl Barden. I don't know if you know Carl. He's MedTox and Venom Laboratories over there.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't seen Carl and Mara in a while, and we love to get together with them and hang out. And if we're not vending, then we can just enjoy ourselves and check everything out. You know,
that's usually what we do. Is we go. We don't vend. We vend very few shows, and we just go hang out and check out and talk to people. The very first, what kind of got us into it, Ryan was into it for a little while before me, but he talked me into going down to Daytona. And I remember we just had this conversation last week when we were talking about, you know, you being on the podcast, that I remember your display, and I remember the whole thing. And he was like, I can't remember, was Greg still doing it like at that time? It was 2012. And you were there for sure. Like, I remember clearly, but so
Yeah, I definitely remember going around the show talking about there's a Python hunter and there's a Python hunter.
Yeah, back in 2012, we were all together. All three of us were right there with
Yeah.
Family Rep.
Yep.
With that, yeah. So
That's cool.
we'll
So-
definitely like to get there.
Yeah, man. Well, if it does happen and we end up down there, we'll definitely say hey. We'll
Absolutely. Like I
do
said,
the
Eric,
mask and the shake. I
down.
don't know.
you guys want to come down and go herping with him, we'll take you out. And,
Yeah.
You'll see a lot of stuff around here. So
That'd be amazing. That'd be
Yeah,
awesome.
that'd be really cool.
absolutely.
Sounds good. So yeah, I appreciate you having you on, and I think we're gonna wrap it up if that's okay with you.
You got it, guys.
This was great, man. It's been real fun. So
Cool.
thank you so much.
You got it, guys. Be safe.
All right.
Take care.